He was killed on the wet concrete outside the lab. When he woke up, he found himself in a stranger's body, inside a temple where a stone altar bestowed magic upon children. A warrior, fire mage, healer. But he ended up with the farmer class, growing grass, the lowest rank. Ethan opens his eyes and sees a vaulted ceiling with golden-winged creatures. He is lying on cold stone. Dozens of teenagers stand around him. He raises his hands and freezes. The fingers are not his own. Thin, calluses in the wrong places, a bruise on his wrist. This guy has been beaten, often. He remembers his foot slipping on the wet concrete by the lab, his temple, the curb, darkness, and now an altar of black stone with green veins and a fire burning right on the stone without fuel. Ethan's brain is working overtime. Classes, skills, ranks. The altar distributes abilities according to the system. Armor and swords in the paintings. The Middle Ages with magic. A priest shouts out names. A red-haired boy places his hand on the stone. The altar flares red. Warrior. Strike of a red-hot blade. Rank B. The hall roars. Next, a girl. Healer. Rank C. Then a fire mage. Rank A. Ethan judges by the crowd's reaction and establishes a hierarchy. A and B are success. C is okay. Anything lower is a death sentence. He recognizes those whom no one embraces by their patched gray uniforms. Orphans. The body he's trapped in is also from the orphanage. The priest shouts, "Ethan Park." He stumbles forward on someone else's wobbly legs and places his hand on the altar. The stone is warm, alive. Something is breathing inside. The altar flares with a dim green light, swampy, the faintest light of the entire ceremony. The hall falls silent with awkwardness. The priest grimaces and looks at the scroll. Class, farmer. Skill, weed growing. Rank, F. Someone snorts, then laughs. Then a word flies through the hall. Weed weaver. Weed weaver. The priest is already waving his hand. Next. And Ethan stands there, smiling with one corner of his mouth. Because they gave the agronomist phytochemist from Cornell the ability to grow plants at an accelerated rate. In a world where medicine consists of herbal concoctions and prayers, where there are no antibiotics, no painkillers, no fever reducers, where people die from infections that on Earth are treated with chamomile tea. He turns and walks toward the exit. They laugh behind his back. The door is in front of him. Beyond the door lies an entire unexplored biosphere, for free. Those who received junk are sent down. They hand Ethan a bag of crackers, a thin blanket, and directions. The village of Green Hollow, 3 days on foot. He has no money for a cart. He has no money at all. He slings the bag over his shoulder and exits through the south gate. The road cuts through yellow, dry fields. Weeds stick out along the roadside. He freezes at the very first bush. He crouches down. He touches a leaf. And an interface flashes in his mind. He senses the entire plant. Roots, 12 centimeters. Stem, water, 63%. Nitrogen, normal. Potassium is almost 0. And alkaloids. He senses them as a taste. Bitter, complex. 3 compounds that didn't exist on Earth. New molecules. His hands are shaking, not from the cold, from excitement. He moves on, faster, stops at every plant, touches it, analyzes, memorizes. By the end of the first day, he has a catalog of 37 species in his head. 7 resemble Earth's medicinal plants. 2 are poisonous. 1 smells like wormwood. Ethan plucks it and tosses it into a bag. On the second day, he heads out to Green Hollow. 12 houses, skinny chickens, a well, and silence. An unnatural silence for a village. No children's cries, no sound of hammers. He walks down the single street past shuttered windows. He reaches the last shack. The door is wide open. Inside, a stench of dampness and Swedish rot hits his nose. The smell of decay. Disease. Ethan enters. A thin, yellow-skinned old man lies on a cot. The blanket is stained brown. He coughs, and red droplets fly onto the rag at his mouth. The old man opens his cloudy red eyes and wheezes 2 words. Go away. Plague. The Crimson Plague. Ethan doesn't leave. He drops to his knees beside the cot. He looks at the old man. Then he steps out into the yard. Ethan went out into the yard and crouched down. The ground beneath his feet was dry, gray. He placed his palm on it, and it flashed again. Loam. pH 6.2. Nitrogen deficient. Phosphorus normal. Potassium nearly 0. But there was something else. A fungus. Mycorrhiza. A local species. It permeated the soil with a fine network to a depth of 30 centimeters. Alive. Active. Ready to work. Ethan withdrew his hand and wiped it on his pants. Then he stood up. He walked to the fence. Grass grew beyond the fence. Ordinary at first glance. He touched a single stalk and it hit him. That same smell of wormwood. That same bush he'd found by the road. Only larger. Ethan plucked 3 shoots. He crushed a leaf between his fingers. The analysis was instant. The alkaloid profile matched Artemisia annua by 70%. There's an artemisinin analog. The concentration is low, natural, about 0.01% of dry weight. On Earth, that would only be enough to write an article. But Ethan isn't on Earth, and he doesn't have the hands of a scientist. He has the hands of a farmer with the skill of growing herbs. He found a clay pot in the shack, cracked but intact. He scooped up some soil from the yard. He planted 3 shoots. He watered them with water from the bucket by the doorstep. He placed the pot on the windowsill, and he placed his palm on top. He closed his eyes, and he asked. Not with words, not with a spell. He simply directed his attention there, into the stem, into the roots, into that spot where the plant synthesizes secondary metabolites. And he said silently, grow. Not just in general, but specifically, roots down, more nodes, wider leaves. And most importantly, artemisinin. More, 10 times, 50 times, 100 times. Concentrate everything in the leaves. His hands began to tingle, then burn, then ache like after 10 hours of shoveling. Ethan didn't move his palm. He felt the plant respond, slowly, as if waking up. The roots crept downward. They found mycorrhiza. They clung to it. The stem twitched, the first node, the second, the third. A leaf unfurled, small, wet, green. Ethan opened his eyes. 3 hours had passed. It was getting dark outside. The shoots had grown 4 centimeters. This was only the beginning. He closed his eyes again. 6 hours later, he could no longer feel his hands. 10 hours later, he could no longer feel his legs. 12 hours later, he slid off the chair onto the floor and lay next to the pot. His eyes were closing on their own, but he held on. 1 more hour. 2 more. By morning, there was a bush in the pot, lush, green. The leaves almost glowed in the dim light. Ethan plucked a leaf and crushed it. Analysis. Artemisinin. Concentration. He blinked. He checked the internal reading again. 1.5% dry weight. On Earth, the norm was 0.01. He had just obtained a concentration 150 times higher than the natural norm. In a single bush. In a single night. His hands were shaking. Not from fatigue, although from that too. He plucked a handful of leaves, found a sooty pot in the corner of the shack, filled it with water, lit a fire in the hearth. He threw the leaves into the boiling water. 10 minutes, no more. Prolonged heating destroys artemisinin. The brew turned murky green. It smelled bitter, sharp. Ethan poured it into a clay mug and took it to the old man. Berthold lay motionless. He was breathing with a wheeze. The red spots on his neck had grown darker overnight. Ethan lifted his head. The old man groaned. Ethan brought the mug to his lips and tilted it. Berthold took a sip. He coughed. He took another. And another. The mug was empty. Ethan lowered his head onto the cot and sat down on the floor beside him. A minute later, he fell asleep. He didn't lie down. He just passed out sitting against the wall. His body had taken its toll. He slept through the whole day. He woke up to a sound. Someone was walking. Heavy footsteps. The floorboards creaking. Ethan opened his eyes. Berthold was standing at the table. Standing. On his feet. He was pale. Thin. His hands were shaking. But he was standing there, poking with a spoon at a pot of dried-up porridge. He turned to Ethan and said he wanted real porridge, not this rock-hard crap. Ethan looked at him. At his neck. The red spots faded. Turned pink. The coughing stopped. Ethan stood up. His legs were buzzing. His head was empty and light. He went out onto the porch, sat down on the step, looked at the pot of wormwood on the windowsill, at the empty mug. Artemisinin. In a world where they don't know what a plasmodium is, where they don't know what a parasite is, where even the word molecule means nothing to anyone. He sat on the porch of a crooked shack in a half-dead village on the edge of an unknown continent, and he laughed quietly. Not out of joy, out of the sheer scale of it. Every fence in this world is a potential pharmacy. Every meadow is a laboratory. Every weed by the roadside might contain an analog of for which a Nobel Prize is awarded on Earth. And no one in this world knows about it. Except for one former graduate student from Cornell, in the body of a beaten-up orphan with the worst scavenging skills in the history of the alt-right. The next day, Berthold was already walking around the yard, swearing at the chickens, demanding that the fence be repaired. And most importantly, he wasn't coughing. Not once. Meanwhile, Ethan surveyed the area around the shack. The soil was poor, but not dead. Mycorrhiza held the soil together. The well water was clean. Good sun. A south-facing slope. He could work here. He walked around the village. 12 houses, 8 inhabited, 4 empty. About 30 people remained in the inhabited ones. Half were sick. The Crimson Plague. Various stages. 3 were in the final stage. Ethan looked at his single wormwood bush. 1 bush would be enough for 3 doses, maybe 4. For 30 people, he needed at least 10 bushes, 10 nights without sleep. Or another way. He returned to the shack, sat down by the pot, thought. Then went outside the fence and gathered every wild wormwood shoot he could find. 42 shoots. He planted them in rows in the yard, straight into the ground. He watered them, and he got to work. But not like at night. At night he gave it his all for a single bush. Now he was spreading it out. A little for each shoot. Not 150 times. 20. Maybe 30. That would be enough. It wasn't perfect, but it would be enough. He worked all day. By evening, 42 shoots had turned into 42 little bushes. Not very tall, knee-high, but alive, green, with the right concentration. Ethan lay down on the ground right between the beds. He looked up at the sky. 2 suns. He'd only just noticed there were 2 suns. The little red one was setting first. The big yellow one still hung high. 2 suns. Another world. He closed his eyes and fell asleep in the furrow between the wormwood bushes. In the morning, Berthold woke him up. The old man stood over him and grumbled that normal people sleep in a house and not in the dirt like pigs. Ethan sat up. Everything ached, but he smiled. 42 bushes, enough for the whole village. Ethan went out into the yard and crouched down. The ground beneath his feet was dry, gray. He placed his palm on it, and it flashed again. Loam, pH 6.2, nitrogen deficient, phosphorus normal, potassium almost 0. But there was something else. A fungus, mycorrhiza, a local species. It permeated the soil with a fine network down to a depth of 30 centimeters. Alive, active, ready to work. Ethan withdrew his hand and wiped it on his pants. Then he stood up. He walked to the fence. Grass grew beyond the fence, ordinary at first glance. He touched a single stem and was overwhelmed by it. That same smell of wormwood. That same bush he'd found on the road, only larger. Ethan plucked 3 shoots. He crushed a leaf between his fingers. The analysis was instant. The alkaloid profile matched Artemisia annua by 70%. There is an artemisinin analog. The concentration is low. Natural. About 0.01% of dry weight. On Earth, that would only be enough to write an article. But Ethan isn't on Earth, and he doesn't have the hands of a scientist. He has the hands of a farmer with the skill of growing herbs. He found a clay pot in the shack, cracked but intact. He scooped up some soil from the yard, planted the 3 shoots, watered them from the bucket by the threshold. He placed the pot on the windowsill and laid his palm on top. He closed his eyes and asked, not with words, not with a spell. He simply directed his attention there, into the stem, to the roots, to that point where the plant synthesizes secondary metabolites. And he said silently, grow. Not just in general, but specifically. Roots down, more nodes, wider leaves, and most importantly, artemisinin. More. 10 times, 50 times, 100 times. Concentrate everything in the leaves. His hands began to tingle, then burn, then ache as if after 10 hours of shoveling. Ethan didn't move his palm. He felt the plant respond, slowly, as if waking up. The roots crept downward, found mycorrhiza, clung to it. The stem twitched. The first node, the second, the third. A leaf unfurled, small, wet, green. Ethan opened his eyes. 3 hours had passed. It was getting dark outside. The shoots had grown 4 centimeters. This was only the beginning. He closed his eyes again. 6 hours later, he could no longer feel his hands. 10 hours later, he could no longer feel his legs. 12 hours later, he slid off the chair onto the floor and lay next to the pot. His eyes were closing on their own, but he held on. Another hour, another 2. By morning, there was a bush in the pot, lush, green. The leaves almost glowed in the dim light. Ethan plucked a leaf and crushed it. Analysis, artemisinin, concentration. He blinked. He checked the internal reading again, 1.5% of dry weight. On Earth, the norm was 0.01. He had just obtained a concentration 150 times higher than the natural norm, in a single bush, in a single night. His hands were shaking, not from fatigue, although from that too. He plucked a handful of leaves. He found a sooty pot in the corner of the shack. He drew some water. He lit a fire in the hearth. He threw the leaves into the boiling water. 10 minutes, no more. Prolonged heating destroys artemisinin. The brew turned murky green. It smelled bitter, sharp. Ethan poured it into a clay mug and took it to the old man. Berthold lay motionless. He was wheezing. The red spots on his neck had grown darker overnight. Ethan lifted his head. The old man groaned. Ethan brought the mug to his lips and tilted it. Berthold took a sip. He coughed, took another, and another. The mug was empty. Ethan lowered his head onto the cot and sat down on the floor beside him. A minute later, he fell asleep. He didn't lie down. He just passed out sitting against the wall. His body had taken its toll. He slept through the whole day. He woke up to a sound. Someone was walking. Heavy footsteps. The floorboards creaking. Ethan opened his eyes. Berthold was standing at the table. Standing. On his feet. He was pale. Thin. His hands were shaking. But he was standing there, poking at a pot of dried-up porridge with a spoon. He turned to Ethan and said he wanted real porridge and not this rock-hard crap. Ethan looked at him, at his neck. The red spots had faded, turned pink. The coughing had stopped. Ethan stood up. His legs were buzzing. His head was empty and light. He went out onto the porch, sat down on the step. He looked at the pot of wormwood on the windowsill, at the empty mug. Artemisinin. In a world where they don't know what a plasmodium is, where they don't know what a parasite is, where even the word molecule means nothing to anyone, He sat on the porch of a crooked shack in a half-dead village on the edge of an unknown continent, and he laughed quietly. Not out of joy, out of the sheer scale of it all. Every fence in this world is a potential pharmacy. Every meadow is a laboratory. Every weed by the roadside might contain the equivalent of something for which they award a Nobel Prize on Earth. And no one in this world knows about it. Except for one former Cornell grad student, in the body of a beaten-up orphan with the crappiest skills in the history of the ultra-right. The next day, Bertold was already walking around the yard, yelling at the chickens, demanding the fence be fixed. And most importantly, he wasn't coughing. Not once. Meanwhile, Ethan surveyed around the shack. The soil was poor, but not dead. Mycorrhiza held the soil together. The water from the well was clean. The sun was good. A south-facing slope. He could work here. He walked around the village. 12 houses. 8 inhabited. 4 empty. About 30 people remained in the inhabited ones. Half were sick. The Crimson Plague. Various stages. 3 were in the final stage. Ethan looked at his single wormwood bush. 1 bush would be enough for 3 doses. Maybe 4. For 30 people, he needed at least 10 bushes. 10 sleepless nights. Or another way. He returned to the shack, sat down by the pot. He thought. Then he went outside the fence and gathered every wild wormwood shoot he could find. 42 shoots. He planted them in rows in the yard, right into the ground. He watered them, and he got to work. But not like he did at night. At night he gave it his all for a single bush. Now he was spreading it out, a little for each shoot. Not 150 times, 20, maybe 30. That would be enough. It wasn't perfect, but it would be enough. He worked all day. By evening, the 42 shoots had turned into 42 little bushes, short, up to knee-high, but alive, green, with the right concentration. Ethan lay down on the ground right between the beds. He looked up at the sky. 2 suns. Only now did he notice there were 2 suns. The small red one was setting first. The big yellow one still hung high. 2 suns. Another world. He closed his eyes and fell asleep in the furrow between the wormwood bushes. In the morning, Bertold woke him up. The old man stood over him and grumbled that normal people in a house, not in the mud like pigs. Ethan sat up. Everything ached, but he smiled. 42 bushes. Enough for the whole village. Ethan started with the worst cases, 3 in the final stages. A woman in her 40s named Martha, a boy of about 12, and Gregor the blacksmith, a sturdy man who now weighed half of what he used to and couldn't lift a spoon. Ethan brewed the decoction. 3 handfuls of leaves, boiling water, 10 minutes, not a second more. He carried it from house to house. He knocked on the closed shutters. They didn't open the door for him. They didn't know him. An orphan from the shelter, a farmer, a dropout. He left mugs on the doorsteps. By evening, the mugs were empty. Desperate people will drink anything. 2 days later, Martha came out into the yard. The boy asked for food. Gregor sat on the bed and cursed at length and with feeling. 3 days later, there wasn't a single bedridden patient left in the village. Ethan worked non-stop. He got up before dawn. He watered the bushes. He analyzed the soil. He corrected the potassium deficiency with ash from the hearth. He gathered leaves. He brewed them. He carried them around. He collapsed into bed and got up again. Bertold watched him, silently. Then he began to help. He carried water. He chopped wood for the hearth. He asked no questions. On the 5th day, the village elder came to Ethan, an older man, wary. His wife came with him, the one Ethan had cured 2 days earlier. The elder asked what Ethan wanted in return for the treatment. Ethan said he needed a plot of land, a big one, with good soil, and boards for a greenhouse. The village headman looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded. By the end of the first week, Ethan had a garden, 20 square meters, fenced in, plowed. Ethan planted it with wormwood. But not only that. He found 14 more species of plants with medicinal potential around the village. One species resembled a daisy. Analysis showed a bisabolol analog, anti-inflammatory. Another resembled plantain, but with thick, fleshy leaves. It contains something similar to allantoin, wound healing. The third species grew only by the stream, blue flowers, a sharp, minty scent. The alkaloid profile was unfamiliar, nothing of this world, a new compound. Ethan labeled it sample number 7 and set it aside for a better time. He worked, methodically, calmly, like in Cornell's greenhouse. Only instead of a dissertation, lives were at stake, and instead of instruments, there were his hands. Midway through the second week, morning, Ethan was standing in the garden checking the chamomile shoots when a figure appeared on the road. A girl, short, freckles, blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, an apron with pockets. Bundles of dried herbs stuck out of the pockets. She walked with confidence, like someone who knows the way. She approached the fence. She stopped. She looked at the garden beds, then at Ethan, then back at the garden beds. Her eyes widened. She said, "That didn't happen. Wormwood doesn't grow that fast. And chamomile doesn't grow next to wormwood. They interfere with each other." Ethan looked at her, then at the garden beds. She was right. In nature, these species are antagonists. But he had modified the wormwood's root system so it wouldn't release inhibitors. He said that if the mycorrhiza was set up correctly, they wouldn't interfere. The girl looked at him as if he'd said the earth was flat. She introduced herself, Lena Ashford, from the village of Hedgemere, 2 days' journey to the east. The herbalist's daughter, class herbalist, rank E. She came because of the rumors. A man in Green Hollow cures the crimson plague, with herbs. No magic, no prayers, just herbs. She didn't believe it. She came to check. Ethan asked what she knew about local plants. Lena started talking and didn't stop for an hour. She knew everything. Names, seasons, where they grew, how to harvest them, which leaves to pick in the morning and which in the evening, which roots to dig up during a full moon. She knew over 200 species. Ethan listened and memorized. Every word she spoke filled in the gaps in his catalog. He knew chemistry. She knew ecology. He understood what a plant does. She understood where it lives and who it associates with. Together, they were a complete map. Ethan asked if she knew the plant with blue flowers by the stream, the minty scent. Lena said it was moon clover. It grows only near running water. It glows at night. Herbalists consider it useless because a decoction made from it doesn't cure anything. Ethan said the decoction doesn't cure because the necessary substances break down when heated. A cold extract is needed. Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she asked if she could stay. Ethan said he needed help. A lot of help. Lena nodded. She took the knapsack off her shoulder. She pulled a bundle out of it. She unwrapped it. Seeds. 20 varieties. Neatly arranged in little bags. Labeled. She had been collecting them for 3 years. Ethan looked at those seeds and felt that, for the first time since the transfer, he wasn't alone. They worked together. Lena knew the local plants. Ethan knew what could be done with them. She showed him one species after another. He analyzed them. They argued. He said the soil's acidity needed to be increased. She said that would kill the mycorrhiza. He said they could introduce another strain. She said there was no other strain here. He thought. She waited. He found a solution. She smiled. By the end of the second week, a greenhouse had appeared in the village. Not a real greenhouse, of course. A wooden frame. A bull's bladder instead of glass. The cracks plugged with moss. But inside it was warmer than outside, and more humid. And Ethan could control the conditions. He moved the moon clover there. 3 chamomile bushes. 5 shoots of a plant that resembled plantain. And he began his first real experiment. A cold extract from the moon clover. He chopped the leaves, poured cold water from the stream over them, covered it, waited a day, filtered it through a cloth. The result was a bluish liquid, odorless. Ethan touched a drop. Analysis. The compound was complex, unlike anything on Earth, but its structure was familiar. He frowned. It resembled anticoagulants, blood thinners. He made a note of it, carefully. It could be medicine. It could be poison. Tests are needed. Time is needed. A lab is needed. He doesn't have a lab. He has a shack. pots, a campfire, and a girl with seeds. In the evening, they sat in the warmth. Lena was cleaning the roots. Ethan was writing down the results with charcoal on a board. It was raining. Drops were tapping on the ox bladder. It was warm. It smelled of earth and mint. Lena asked how he had learned about mycorrhiza. Ethan said he had studied. Lena asked where. Ethan paused. Then he said it was far away. Very far away. Lena didn't ask any further. She just nodded and continued cleaning the roots. Ethan watched her. Freckles. Hands in the soil. Bundles of herbs in her pockets. Quiet. Calm. Like a daisy in a field. He returned to the board. There was a list on the board. Wormwood, chamomile, plantain, moon clover. 4 species in 2 weeks. In a month, there would be 20. In 6 months, he would plant the entire valley. In a year, he would change this world. Or this world would kill him first. The end of the 3rd week. Rumors spread faster than Ethan could control them. The village that had been dying out from the plague suddenly came to life. Everyone stood up. Everyone is healthy. Blacksmith Gregor is hammering again. Children are running through the streets. You can't hide something like this. First they came from Far Creek, a small village half a day's journey away. 3 of them, a man and 2 women. The man has crimson spots on his neck. Stage 2. One of the women has a sick child. She was carrying him in her arms. 2 years old, pale, not crying. He stopped crying. A bad sign. Ethan examined the child. He touched his forehead. A fever, high. Then he touched the spots on the man's neck, and he sensed it. The plague. But not like Berthold's, a different strain, more aggressive, mutated. He could feel the difference in structure. Like a phytochemist senses the difference between isomers. The same disease, a different form. Ethan walked into the greenhouse. Lena was already preparing the decoction. He stopped her, said that regular wormwood wouldn't work. A different concentration was needed, a different profile. He sat down by the garden bed. He chose the healthiest wormwood bush. He placed his palm on it. He closed his eyes, and he began to alter it. Not just more artemisinin, a different artemisinin, with a slight shift in the molecular structure. He didn't know if he could do it. He didn't know the limits of his ability. He tried, slowly, carefully, like a surgeon. An hour, 2, 3. Sweat poured down his face. His hands burned. By the 4th hour, he felt he'd succeeded. The bush had changed. The leaves had grown slightly darker. The scent was slightly sharper. Ethan plucked a leaf. Analysis. Yes. A modified analog. Not Earth's artemisinin. Not local. A 3rd variant. A hybrid. He brewed a decoction. Gave it to the first child. In small sips. The child grimaced. Bitter. The mother held him and cried. Then the man. Then the second woman. As a preventive measure. Ethan told them to wait. The night was long. Ethan sat on the porch and didn't sleep. Not because he couldn't, because he was afraid. He wasn't sure about the dosage. He wasn't sure about the modification. On Earth, they test things like this for years. On mice. On cell cultures. Here, he had 1 shot. And a 2-year-old child. Toward morning, the mother came out of the house. She was carrying the child. He was asleep, sleeping soundly, breathing evenly. The spots on his neck had faded. The mother sank to her knees in front of Ethan, right in the mud. He lifted her by the elbows, told her not to. She was crying and couldn't hear him. Lena stood in the greenhouse doorway, crying too. Ethan led the woman back into the house, put the child to bed. He returned to the porch, sat down. His hands were shaking. Not from fatigue, from the fact that he had just, on the spot, without equipment, without a control group, without a single instrument, created a modified antiparasitic drug and given it to the child. And he'd guessed right. But he could have guessed wrong. That terrified him. A week later, more came. From Medni Log, from Verknia Veselki, in pairs, in threes. The scarlet plague was everywhere. Villages were dying out. Healers couldn't keep up, not even A-rank healers. Ethan treated them. Every day. Every evening. Every night. Lena helped. She prepared decoctions. She dried herbs. She kept records. The records were important. Ethan insisted. Every patient. Name. Age. Stage of the disease. Dosage. Time. Result. He kept records like a researcher. Because he was a researcher. Only now his laboratory was the size of a village. By the end of the 4th week, he had cured 47 people. Not a single fatality. Not a single side effect more serious than a headache. Wormwood worked. His modification worked. Rumors turned into stories. Stories turned into legends. In the neighboring villages, people said that a healer lived in Green Hollow. Not a mage, not a priest. A farmer who heals with a decoction of weeds. Some laughed. Others went. In the middle of the 4th week, a carriage appeared on the road. A real carriage, with a coat of arms. A team of 4 horses. A coachman in livery. 2 horsemen rode alongside the carriage, armed. The carriage stopped in the square by the well. A woman stepped out, about 35 years old, an expensive dress, a pale face, eyes red from tears. A stretcher was carried out behind her. A girl lay on the stretcher, about 6 years old, motionless, waxy. Her hair was matted with sweat. Crimson spots covered her neck, her arms, her chest. Stage 4, the final stage. Ethan had never seen stage 4. Berthold had stage 3. The child from Dalney Rooch had stage 2. Stage 4 is when the body stops fighting, when the pathogen wins and begins to destroy the tissues. On Earth, it's roughly like advanced sepsis. Hours, maybe a day. The woman approached Ethan. She didn't speak. She stood and watched, and there was such emptiness in her eyes that Ethan forgot to breathe for a second. She wasn't a peasant, a noble woman, maybe from the capital. She had traveled for 3 days, with her dying daughter, on a rumor about a farmer from the village, her last hope. Ethan looked at the girl. He placed his hand on her forehead. The scan began, and stopped. Too much data. The disease was everywhere, in the blood, in the lungs, in the liver. The body was falling apart. Regular wormwood wouldn't help. Modified wormwood might not be fast enough. A shock dose was needed. Maximum concentration was needed, and something else was needed, something besides wormwood. Ethan turned to Lena. He asked what she knew about plants that strengthen tissues. Not cure them, don't kill the pathogen, but keep the body alive while the medicine works. Lena thought. Then she said, silver moss. It grows on the rocks on the northern slope. Old herbalists used it for severe wounds, not for treatment, so that the person wouldn't die while being treated. Ethan asked her to bring some. Lena ran off. Ethan went into the greenhouse. He took the most potent wormwood bush, the very first one, with a concentration 150 times higher. He plucked every leaf, every single one. The bush would die after that. He knew it. It didn't matter. Lena returned an hour later, with an armful of silvery moss. Ethan took it. He touched it. Analysis. Polysaccharides. Complex. Plenty. And something else. Something like a growth factor. A cell regeneration stimulant. Not an earth-based analog. Local. Unique. Ethan brewed 2 decoctions separately. Wormwood. 10 minutes. Moss. Cold infusion. An hour. Then he mixed them. Carefully. A teaspoon of moss per mug of wormwood. No more. He didn't know how they'd interact. He was guessing. Guessing again. He brought it to the girl's lips. She wouldn't swallow. He massaged her throat as one does with newborn kittens. Slowly. Drop by drop. The liquid went down. Her mother stood nearby. Not breathing. Lena stood by the door. Not breathing. Berthold stood in the yard and prayed for the first time in 30 years. An hour. Nothing. 2 hours. Nothing. On the 3rd hour, the girl sighed. Deeply. Like a person who had surfaced from the water. Ethan checked her pulse. More even. Lower temperature. The spots. He looked at the spots. They hadn't faded, but they had stopped spreading. The body was holding on. The moss was working. Ethan gave her a second dose. 6 hours later, the girl opened her eyes. Her mother fell to her knees. Ethan left the house. He leaned against the wall. He felt sick with exhaustion. Lena brought him water. He drank and couldn't stop. Then he sat down on the ground. Lena sat down beside him. They were silent. A carriage bearing a coat of arms stood in the square. A coachman in livery was looking at Ethan. The horsemen were looking at Ethan. Tomorrow they would return to the capital, and they would tell. The rumor had become fact. A week had passed since the carriage. Ethan knew the clock was ticking. The capital would find out. The guilds would find out. The church would find out. The crown would find out. Each of them would want something from him. And none of them needed him as a person. They needed his skill. He sat in the greenhouse at night and thought. Lena slept in the shack. Berthold snored so loudly it could be heard through 2 walls. Pots of plants stood on the shelves. 23 varieties, labeled, sorted. His little pharmacy. His only trump card. He had to be ready. In the morning, Ethan started building. Not alone. Gregor the blacksmith helped. And 2 guys from the village, Mark and Tobias. Both healthy, both cured, both in his debt. Not because Ethan thought so, because they thought so themselves. Ethan said that he needed a second greenhouse, bigger than the first one, with a stone foundation, with proper drainage, with 2 sections, a warm one and a cold one. Gregor didn't ask why. He just forged the brackets and hinges. Mark hauled stones. Tobias chopped boards. Ethan directed. He knew what a greenhouse should look like. He'd worked in Cornell's greenhouses for 3 years. Only instead of polycarbonate, he'd have a bull's bladder. Instead of a thermostat, a fire in a pit. Instead of a thermometer, his own hands. He'd touch the air inside and feel the temperature. Humidity. That was it. By the end of the 3rd day, the greenhouse was standing. Crooked, with holes in 2 places, but it was standing. It was 25 degrees inside, 10 outside. Ethan moved the most valuable specimens there. Moon clover, 3 varieties of modified wormwood, silver moss, and a new species that Lena had brought from the swamps, nameless. Ethan called it Sample 14, a small plant with yellow flowers. Analysis showed an analog of salicylic acid, aspirin, in a world without aspirin. Ethan stood in the new greenhouse and looked at his beds, and thought about foxglove. On Earth, foxglove contains digoxin, a cardiac glycoside. It saves lives in cases of arrhythmia. It kills in cases of overdose. A fine line. Somewhere in this world there is an analog of foxglove. He must find it. But first, other problems. Lena came in the morning with news. Things had gotten worse in Hedmir, her home village. The plague had reached there. Her father was sick. The very one who said her skill was worthless, who gambled away her dowry. She stood before Ethan and didn't cry. She just stood there and said nothing. Ethan asked how many sick people there were in Hedmir. Lena said about 60. It's a big village. Ethan did the math. 60 doses. He didn't have that many. He needed at least 4 days to grow enough. Lena nodded. She said she'd wait. Ethan said he wouldn't wait. He'd teach her. Lena froze. He said he'd show her how to prepare the decoction, what dosage, how long to steep it, what the signs of each stage are. She wouldn't just be helping. She would be treating people. On her own. Lena said she was only E rank, that her skill was useless, that she wasn't a healer. Ethan looked at her. Then he said his skill was F rank, and that there are no useless skills. There are only people who don't know how to use them. Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. They spent 2 days in the greenhouse. Ethan taught. Lena memorized. She was the best student he could have imagined. She knew plants. The only thing she lacked was an understanding of what could be done with them. Ethan gave her that understanding. Not chemistry, not formulas, just principles. Bitter substances kill parasites. Mucilaginous substances protect tissues. Pungent substances stimulate blood flow. A cold infusion preserves what heat destroys. 10 minutes of boiling water is the maximum for wormwood. 5 minutes for chamomile. Never heat moss. Lena wrote everything down on wax tablets, in neat, small handwriting. On the third day, she left for Hedgemere with a bag of dried wormwood and a set of tablets with instructions. Ethan stood at the gate and watched her go. Berthold stood beside him and said she was a good girl. Ethan nodded. Berthold said that, by the way, she had baked the pie for 3 hours. Ethan looked at him. Berthold shook his head and went inside. Ethan stayed at the gate. A pie? What pie? He didn't remember any pie. Then he remembered. Yesterday, Lena had brought a berry pie. He ate 3 slices, said it was delicious. Lena ran away. He didn't understand why. He still didn't understand why. Berthold sighed from behind the wall so loudly it could be heard in the yard. Ethan returned to the greenhouse. He didn't have time for pies. He had 60 patients in Hedgemere, an unknown number in other villages, and the clock was ticking until the capital turned its attention to him. He worked. 4 days. He'd grown a new batch of wormwood, modified sample 14, yellow flowers, aspirin. The concentration of salicylic acid had risen to an acceptable level. He could now bring down fevers, not with magic, with a pill. Well, not a pill. With a decoction. But the principle was the same. By the end of the 5th week, a boy ran in from Hedgemere, a messenger. He said that Mrs. Lena had already cured 30 people, and that her father was well, and that he had cried. Ethan nodded. He asked if there were any complications. The boy said 2 of them had stomach aches. Ethan wrote on a tablet, "Have the dosage. Add chamomile. Give with food." The boy ran back. Ethan watched him go. His system was working. Not him personally. The system. Lena was treating people without him, following his instructions. That was more important than any miracle. A miracle is one person with a skill. A system is when skill isn't needed, when knowledge works on its own. In the evening, he sat on the porch. It was raining. Warm. Summer rain. It smelled of wet earth. The scent of mint drifted from the greenhouse. Berthold was inside cooking porridge and cursing the burnt-out pot. On the table in the shack lay a board with notes. 23 types. 47 patients in Green Hollow. 30 in Hedgemore, and 1 girl from the capital. Ethan counted in his head. In a week or 2, people would arrive here. Not peasants, not desperate mothers. People in armor, in robes, with seals and orders. He had to be ready. He had no army, no magic, no connections. He has a greenhouse, garden beds, knowledge, and 1 E-rank herbalist who, right now, is in another village, saving people with a decoction made from weeds. That's not enough, but it's a start. The rain grew heavier. Ethan went inside, lay down, closed his eyes, and thought that tomorrow he needed to find a substitute for foxglove. Then he thought about the pie. Then he fell asleep. They arrived on the 9th day after the carriage. Not an army. Worse. A single woman. A white robe. A silver clasp at her throat. Black hair down to her shoulders. A gray strand on the left. 22 years old. That only happens from overexertion of healing magic. Ethan stood by the greenhouse and watched her dismount. Her movements were precise. Her back was straight. Her face was stony. Eyes cold. She scanned the village. Crooked houses. A dirty square. Chickens in the dust. Then she looked at the greenhouse. Then at Ethan. At his dirty hands. At his patched shirt. At his face. Una So. Former court healer of Caldarian. Class. Sacred healer. Rank. A. She hadn't come to heal. She had come to expose. The capital was buzzing with rumors. A farmer in the village was curing the crimson plague. With herbs. Without divine power. Without prayers. Without rituals. The Church of the Bright Mother was furious. Healing is a gift from the goddess. Only through her. Only through pain and sacrifice. Only through sacred healers who give up their own life force to save another's. And here, some F rank is brewing tea and people are getting better. It's heresy. Or quackery. Una came to find out which. She approached Ethan and said she was from the Temple of the Bright Mother, that she had been tasked with investigating claims of healing. That if he was a quack, he faced trial. If he's a heretic, he faces the stake. Her voice was even, calm, without threat, just facts. Ethan nodded. He said she could investigate. He offered her tea. Una ignored the tea. She walked into the house. She examined Bertold. She placed her hand on his chest. Her palm glowed white. Diagnostic magic, highest level. She was examining his body. Ethan saw her face change, slowly. Surprise she was trying to hide. Bertold was healthy, completely. No trace of the plague, no trace of injury, as if he'd never been sick. Una removed her hand. She was silent. Then she asked for the next patient. Ethan led her through the village, house after house, patient after patient. Una examined everyone, silently, thoroughly. By noon she had examined 20 people, all healthy. Una stood in the middle of the village square and was silent. Ethan waited. She asked how. One word. Ethan led her to the greenhouse, showed her the beds. Wormwood, chamomile, silver moss, sample 14. He explained the principle. The plant contains a substance that kills the pathogen. He concentrates this substance, brews it, gives it to the patient. The substance does the work, not God, not magic, the substance. Una listened. Her face showed no expression. Then she asked how he knew that. Ethan said he had studied it. Una asked where they taught farmers phytochemistry. Ethan remained silent. Una stood in the greenhouse and looked at the wormwood bushes. Then she said quietly that a month ago, a boy had been brought to her at the capital's hospital. 6 years old, stage 4. She treated him for 12 hours. She gave so much life force that she lost consciousness. They had to resuscitate her for 2 days afterward. The boy died. She woke up and learned that he had died while she was unconscious. No one else could continue the treatment. She was the only A-rank healer in the hospital. She fell silent. Ethan was silent too. Then Una asked. If they had given her his decoction back then, he would have survived. Ethan said that most likely yes. Una stood motionless. A second, 2, 3. Then she turned and walked out of the greenhouse. Ethan followed her. She stood in the courtyard, her face turned away. Her back was straight, her shoulders were like stone, but her hands were trembling. Without turning around, she asked if she could stay. Not from the temple, not on an inspection, just to stay. Ethan said he needed someone with diagnostic magic. Someone who could see what was happening inside the body. He could heal, but he couldn't see. He could only sense plants, not people. Una turned around. She looked at him. For the first time all day, her eyes were alive. She nodded. That evening, Una sent a letter to the capital. It said that the investigation was ongoing and that she would be delayed for an indefinite period. She didn't write what she had found. She didn't write that he was the real one. She didn't know yet what to do about it. But she stayed. Una worked differently than Lena. Lena was warm, quiet. She worked with her hands and intuition. Una was precise, cold. She worked with logic and diagnostics. She scanned patients before and after they took the decoction. She recorded changes. She noted the duration of effect. She calculated the concentration of the pathogen in the blood before and after. She did what Ethan couldn't. She saw the result from the inside. After 3 days of working together, they created the first treatment protocol. First stage, 1 dose of wormwood, 1 mug a day, 3 days. Second stage, double dose, twice a day, 5 days. Third stage, triple dose plus chamomile, 3 times a day, 7 days. Fourth stage, a high dose plus silver moss, every 4 hours. Until stabilized. Una wrote the protocol on parchment, in beautiful, calligraphic handwriting. Ethan looked at the parchment and thought that this was the first medical protocol in the history of this world. Not a spell, not a prayer, a protocol. Dosages, indications, contraindications. He hung it on the wall of the greenhouse. Una stood nearby and looked at him. Then she said he was strange. Ethan asked why. She said that anyone else in his place would have demanded gold for it, a title, land. But he had hung the prescription on the wall for everyone to see. Ethan said that medicine shouldn't be a secret. Una was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly that in all her years at the temple, No one had ever told her that healing wasn't a sacrifice. Ethan looked at her, at the gray strand in her black hair, at the shadows under her eyes, at her slender wrists. She had been burning herself out for years, giving her life to strangers. And no one had ever told her that it was possible to heal without burning out. He said that healing is a craft, not a feat, a craft. One that can be taught, one that can be passed on, one that shouldn't kill the person who practices it. Yuna looked at him. A second. 2. Then she turned away and went into the house. Berthold stood by the fence and told Ethan that she had some spunk. Ethan didn't understand what he meant. Berthold sighed. The second time this week. Lena returned from Hedgemeier 2 days after Yuna's arrival. 60 patients, all cured, not a single fatality. She entered Green Hollow tired, thinner, with sunken eyes, but with her back straight. She saw Yuna and stopped. Yuna was standing by the greenhouse with a parchment, writing something down. A white robe, a silver clasp. Lena looked at her, then at Ethan. Ethan introduced them to each other. Yuna So, healer, A rank. Lena Ashford, herbalist, E rank. Yuna looked Lena up and down. Not on purpose, just a habit. She'd been the best in the room her whole life. Lena tightened the straps of her knapsack. Ethan saw this and said that Lena had just single-handedly healed 60 people, according to his protocol, without healing skills, without magic, with herbs. Yuna looked at Lena differently. She nodded silently. Respect. Small, but genuine. The three of them began working together. Ethan grew, Lena gathered and prepared, Yuna diagnosed and supervised. 3 links in a single chain. The end of the 5th week. Ethan was standing in the greenhouse analyzing a new sample when a rider appeared on the road. Alone. No carriage, no entourage. Fast. The horse was foaming at the mouth. The rider dismounted at the gate. Red hair, tall, leather armor, 2 short swords on her back, a scar across her right eyebrow, and a gaze that made you want to take a step back. Ashley Kane, a mercenary, class, Blade of the Wind, rank B. She approached Ethan and said she'd been paid to protect him. Ethan asked who. Ashley said it was none of his business. Then she added that he needed to know something. The Alchemist Guild had hired 3 men. Not for protection, for the opposite. Ethan asked how much time he had. Ashley said the assassins had left the capital 4 days ago. Light cavalry. They'll arrive in 2 days. Maybe 3 if the rains wash out the road. Ethan looked up at the sky. Clear. Not a cloud in sight. 2 days. He walked into the greenhouse. He looked at his garden beds. 23 varieties. Decoctions. Tinctures. Powders. Among them was 1 pot he'd been working on 3 days ago. Sample number 9. A small, unremarkable plant with gray leaves. Lena called it the dusty bellflower. It grows in wastelands. No one pays it any attention. Ethan did. Because its alkaloid profile contained something similar to capsaicin, but 10 times more potent, and in the form of a volatile powder. He looked at the dust bell and thought. Then he turned to Ashley. Asked if she could hold them off as they approached the village. Not kill them, just hold them off. Ashley said she could. But not for long. 3 against 1 isn't the best odds, even for a B rank. Ethan nodded. He said he needed a day. Ashley looked at him, at his garden beds, at his dirty hands. She asked what he was going to do. He said he was going to grow something. Ashley shrugged. She was used to strange clients. But this one was stranger than usual. Ethan worked all night. Dust bell. 20 plants. Maximum concentration of volatile alkaloid. He pushed the plants to the limit. He pushed himself to the limit. By dawn, he had 20 plants with powder on their leaves. Fine. Silvery. Light. The slightest breeze carried it into the air. When inhaled, it caused a burning sensation in the eyes, a spasm in the airways, disorientation. Not fatal, but 10 minutes of complete helplessness. Ethan gathered the powder into 3 small bags. Thin fabric. Shake it slightly and a cloud. He gave them to Ashley. Explained. She listened, at first skeptically, then attentively, then with that look a professional gets when they see an unconventional solution and realize it will work. She took the bags and left. Ethan sat on the porch. Una came out of the house. She asked what was going on. Ethan explained. Una turned pale. Then she straightened up and said that if anyone got hurt, she was ready. Lena came out of the greenhouse. She heard. She didn't turn pale. She just silently walked over to the seedlings and started carrying the pots down to the basement. If there was a fight, the seedlings had to be hidden. Ethan watched them, the healer and the herbalist, preparing for an attack, calmly, without panic. He sat down again and waited. The assassins came the next day, in the morning. 3 of them. Light armor, hoods, blades, professionals. They were walking along the road toward the village, quietly, confidently. At the fork by the old oak tree, 100 paces from the first houses, Ashley met them. She stood in the middle of the road, 2 swords in her hands, smiling. She said the road was closed. The first assassin didn't bother to speak. He attacked immediately. Fast. C rank, maybe higher. Ashley dodged the blow. She slid to the side. A blade of wind. Her movements were such that the air whistled. She parried. She counterattacked. She retreated. Not because she was losing, because she was leading them. Back. To the bend in the road, where 3 little bags hung from thin strings in the bushes. The other 2 came in from the flanks. Ashley retreated. A step. Another step. The first assassin slashed down from above. She ducked. She tugged the string. The 3 pouches burst simultaneously, a silvery cloud. Thin, light, almost invisible. The first assassin inhaled. The second inhaled. The third managed to hold his breath, but the powder got in his eyes. 3 seconds later, all 3 were on the ground, coughing, scratching their faces with their hands. One tried to crawl. His eyes were watering so much he couldn't see where he was going. Ashley stood over them. She hadn't inhaled. Ethan warned. A rag over the face. Breathe through your mouth. The powder only works through the nose and eyes. She tied them up, neatly, professionally. Dragged them to the village, dumped them in the square by the well. Ethan walked over, looked at them. 3 healthy men, trained killers, lying in the mud and whimpering because their eyes. He crouched down next to the first one, gave him some water, rinsed his eyes. The effect will wear off in half an hour, no lasting effects. The first assassin blinked, looked at Ethan, a skinny guy, a dirty shirt, hands in the dirt, a farmer, who had just stopped 3 professional assassins with a flower bush. Ethan asked him who sent them. The assassin remained silent. Ethan didn't press the issue. He already knew. The Alchemist's Guild. Master Velior Stormhold. He told the assassins they could leave, alive, unharmed, with a message for the master, a simple message. Next time he wouldn't use the powder that burns the eyes. Next time he'd use the one that stops the heart. He was bluffing. He didn't have that kind of powder. Not yet, anyway. But he'd find some digitalis. And when he did, he'd have it. The assassins left, quickly, without looking back. Ashley stood nearby, twirling a sword on her finger. She said it was the strangest assignment of her life. Then she said she was staying. Ethan asked on what terms. Ashley said on the terms of a roof over her head and hot meals. And that if he dared to die while she was guarding him, she'd kill him herself. And Ethan agreed to the terms. Week 6. Ethan sat in the greenhouse and counted. Not plants, people. 107 patients in a month and a half. Not a single fatality. 4 villages, 1 noble woman from the capital. 3 neutralized assassins. 1 healer who left the temple. 1 mercenary who stayed for food. 1 herbalist who treats patients on her own. And 1 old man who grumbles that the porridge is burning. Not bad for an F-rank farmer. But not enough. Ethan knew that Velior wouldn't stop. The attempt failed. There will be a second. And a third. The Alchemist Guild isn't just 3 mercenaries with blades. It's an organization with money, connections, and people in every city. And they aren't the only problem. The Church of the Bright Mother still hadn't received a report from Una. Sooner or later, they'd send someone else. The Crown was silent too, for now. But the noblewoman's carriage had returned to the capital, and the girl was alive. The king knew. Ethan had to grow faster than the threats were mounting. First things first, protection. He remembered the dust bell. The powder worked, but only once. He needed something permanent. Ethan walked around the village's outskirts. 2 days. He searched. He found it. On the eastern slope grew a small, creeping plant, odorless, flowerless, a gray-green carpet. Lena called it stone tears, a useless weed. Ethan touched it. Analysis. The root system secreted a substance into the soil that caused intense itching upon contact with the skin. Not dangerous, but unbearable, for about 4 hours. Ethan smirked. He planted it around the village perimeter, a strip 3 meters wide. He left a passage on both sides of the road. Clear. Those who know will pass through. Those who don't know will crawl through the bushes, and in an hour will be itching so badly they'll forget why they came. Ashley looked at the strip and said it was the most cowardly defense she'd ever seen. Then she thought about it and said it was the smartest defense she'd ever seen. Next up, supplies. Ethan set up a drying shed. A simple one. Wooden frames, fabric, shade, wind. Dried wormwood leaves keep for months. They lose some potency, but not critically. He could build up a stockpile, not depend on fresh bushes. Lena dried them, ground them, packed them into little bags, small ones, 1 serving each, with labels, Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, just like at a pharmacy. Una checked every batch, scanned it, verified the concentration, put a label on it. Quality control. Ethan watched them work and thought this wasn't treatment anymore. It was production. Small scale, artisanal, but production. Money was a third concern. Ethan didn't have any, not a penny. He treated people for free. He ate from Berthold's garden. Ashley ate for 3. Una had brought some silver, but it had run out. They needed income. Ethan looked at sample 14. Aspirin, a fever reducer. It doesn't cure the plague, but it works perfectly for ordinary fevers, colds, toothaches, and headaches. And it's not a unique medicine. It's a mass-market product, one that everyone needs, every day. He grew a batch, 100 plants, not at maximum concentration, just moderate, so they wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. Lena and Berthold harvested it, dried it, ground it, packaged it. 500 little bags, 3 doses in each. Ethan wrote instructions on each one. Brew a pinch in a mug of water. Drink when in pain or feverish, no more than 3 times a day. He sent Mark and Tobias to Copper Log, the nearest town with a market, with 50 bags. The price was 1 copper coin. 1 copper coin. Cheaper than a bowl of soup at the tavern. Alchemists sold fever-reducing elixirs for silver. Ethan sold them for a copper coin. Mark and Tobias returned 2 days later, without the pouches, with a sack of copper coins, 50 of them. Not much, but it was his first income. First income. The first sign that his knowledge could not only save lives, but also put food on the table. Ethan looked at the copper coins and thought that in a year, this little bag would turn into a chain of pharmacies. Week 7. A girl arrived in Green Hollow in the morning. A little girl. About 12 years old she looked, maybe younger. Dark skin, huge eyes. Her hood pulled low. She didn't come by the road, she came through the woods. She went around the strip of weeping stone, not by accident. She sensed the plants. Not like Ethan, different. She just knew you couldn't go there. Ethan found her in the barn that morning, huddled in a corner between the hay bales, shivering. When he reached out, she hissed, literally, and scratched him. Claws, short, sharp, inhuman. Ethan pulled his hand back, looked at the scratch, looked at the girl. Horns were sticking out from under her hair beneath the hood, small, dark, curved backward, a half-demon. Ethan knew about demons from snippets of conversation, overheard on the road, in the village. Demons are evil. Half-demons are worse than evil. They are filth. The Church of the Bright Mother burns them without trial. Villagers stone them to death. The guilds won't take them. The army won't take them. They are outcasts, worse than F-rank farmers. Ethan silently walked out of the barn. The girl watched him go, her eyes were haunted. She was waiting for stones, or fire, or just a scream. Ethan returned 5 minutes later, with a bowl of porridge, warm, with butter. He set it on the floor between them, sat down by the wall, didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there. The girl looked at the porridge, at him, at the porridge. 10 minutes later she reached out, took the bowl, ate quickly, greedily, choked. Ethan sat and waited. When she finished eating, he asked her name. She was silent. He didn't press her. He stood up, he left. The next day he brought porridge again, and water, and a piece of bread. On the third day she spoke. Meyer Khan. She's 17, not 12. She's just small. From the southern islands. Her mother was killed. Her father is a demon. He abandoned her. She ran for 2 months, through 3 kingdoms. She was chased everywhere. It smells like grass here. She came for the scent. Because grass doesn't chase you. Ethan listened, didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he said she could stay in the barn as long as she wanted, that no one would touch her, that if anyone tried, she should tell him. Meyer looked at him, didn't believe him, but she didn't leave. A week later, she stopped hiding during the day. 2 weeks later, she started helping, silently. She carried water, weeded the garden beds. She had nimble hands, and a strange intuition for plants. She knew without testing which bush was healthy and which was sick. Ethan noticed and accepted it as a given. Blood call class. S rank. Forbidden. The church wants to burn her. Ethan thought about this and felt something rising inside him that he rarely recognized in himself. Not anger, quieter than anger, colder, determination. He had been growing a small pot of flowers in her room in the barn, night blooming, white. They only opened in the dark. They smelled of honey. Meyer found them that evening and stood there silently for a long time. Then she looked at Ethan as he walked past. He didn't stop. He didn't explain. He just walked past. As if night-blooming flowers in a shed were normal for a half-demon girl. As if that's how it was supposed to be. Meyer stood in front of the pot and, for the first time in 2 years, didn't tremble. Week 8. Ethan stood in the greenhouse and stared at the wall. 3 scrolls hung on the wall. The treatment protocol for the Crimson Plague, a list of, a map of the surrounding villages with notes on where certain plants grow. Una stood nearby, silently studying the map. From behind the wall, Ashley could be heard scolding Bertold for throwing trash by the fence. Lena was grinding chamomile in the drawing room. Meyer was watering the garden beds in the yard. 5 people. 6, counting Ethan himself. A small world. Fragile. In the morning, a messenger arrived from Copper Hollow. A boy of about 14, out of breath. He said that people from the capital had appeared in town. They were asking about the herbalist from Green Hollow. Not from the guild, not from the church, from the palace, with the crown crest on their cloaks. Ethan nodded. He sent the boy on his way, gave him 2 pouches of fever reducer for his family. The boy ran off, happy. Ethan sat on the porch and thought. The crown. King Caldarian. A reward of 10,000 gold pieces for a cure for the plague. He could get that money. Could get a title, an estate, protection, everything he needed. But that meant dependence. It meant orders. It meant a golden cage. Grow what they say, treat whom they command. He'd seen how monarchies worked, even on Earth, even in textbooks. They take your talent, put you to work, squeeze you dry, throw you away. He needed a different path. The next day, the carriage didn't arrive. Instead, a letter came. A pigeon, a wax seal, the Caldarian coat of arms. Una intercepted the pigeon and brought the letter to Ethan. He broke the seal. He read it. The letter was from the court chancellery, polite, dry. He was invited to the capital, for an audience, to discuss the state program to combat the plague. They promised safe passage, board and lodging, rooms in the palace, and not a word about whether he would be able to leave afterward. Ethan read it 3 times. Every word had been carefully chosen. Every sentence left room for maneuver. They weren't forcing him. They were inviting him. But refusing the king's invitation was an answer in itself. He showed the letter to Yuna. She read it for a long time. Then she said she knew someone at court who could help. Not with the audience, with conditions. Ethan asked who. Yuna paused. Then she said, the third princess, Seriana Calderion. Yuna had treated her when she was a child, the only one at court who treated Yuna like a human being. Ethan asked what kind of person she was. Yuna said she was smart. Very smart. That everyone underestimates her. The third daughter. The unloved one. Class, diplomat, C rank. For a princess, that's a disgrace. But that is exactly why she is dangerous. Because she has spent her whole life surviving by wits rather than strength. Ethan nodded. He told Yuna to write to her. Not officially, privately. Yuna wrote that very evening. The dove flew off at dawn. The reply came 3 days later. Quickly. Suspiciously quickly. As if the princess had been waiting for this letter. As if she already knew. The reply was short. She would come herself, incognito, in a week. Ethan read it and realized the princess was playing her own game. One he didn't yet understand. But she was coming. And it was either salvation or a trap. He decided to prepare for both possibilities. The 8th week dragged on. Ethan didn't sit idly by. He worked. He finally found a substitute for Foxglove. Not near the village, far away. A 2-day hike into the foothills. Ashley went with him. She grumbled the whole way. Said that normal people don't climb mountains for a flower. Ethan didn't argue. He found it on a rocky slope. A tall plant, bell-shaped flowers, purple and white, beautiful. He touched a leaf. Analysis. Glycosides. Cardiac. A digitalis analog, almost identical. Dangerous. Deadly if overdosed. And life-saving for heart failure. He dug up 3 bushes with their roots, carefully, like a surgeon. Carried them back in a wet rag. 2 days. Ashley carried his backpack and her own. Didn't complain. Watched as he wrapped the roots and said nothing. That evening at a rest stop, she asked why he needed a poisonous flower. Ethan said that any medicine is poison in the wrong dosage, and any poison is medicine in the right one. Ashley was silent. Then she said he sounded like the crazy old man from her village. Only that man was crazy, and Ethan wasn't, and that was even scarier. They returned. Ethan planted the foxglove in a separate pot, in a separate corner of the greenhouse, with a sign. Dangerous. Do not touch. Yuna asked why. Ethan explained. Cardiac glycosides. A cure for arrhythmia, for heart failure. And if anyone ever sends assassins again, that's the weapon. He said it calmly, without bravado, like a fact. Yuna looked at him, then at the foxglove, then back at him. She asked if it scared him that he could kill. Ethan said it did, very much so. That's exactly why the pot is in the corner, with a label. That's exactly why he's the only one who knows the dosage. Yuna was silent. Then she nodded. In the evening, they sat in the greenhouse, the 4 of them. Lena was cleaning roots. Yuna was writing in her diary. Ashley was sharpening her sword. Ethan was analyzing moon clover. Meyer brought them all tea. Silently. She set down the mugs. She left. A minute later she returned. She sat in the corner, pulled her knees up to her chest, watched them. Silence. Rain on the roof. The smell of mint and wet earth. The lamp crackled. Ethan looked up from the clover and glanced around. 4 women. A healer, an herbalist, a warrior, a half-demon child, and him, a farmer, F rank, in a crooked greenhouse on the edge of the village. And for the first time since the transfer, he felt good. Truly good. Not like a scientist who had made a discovery, like a man who had a place to go in the evening. He returned to the moon clover, but he was smiling. For a long time. Princess Seriana Calderion arrived exactly 1 week later, just as she had promised, without an entourage, without a carriage, on horseback, in a traveling cloak, a hood, a simple dress, not a single piece of jewelry. If Yuna hadn't come out to meet her, Ethan would have taken her for the daughter of a small-time merchant. She dismounted. She pulled back her hood. Blonde hair, gray eyes, a delicate face, beautiful, but not striking. A face like that is easy to forget in a crowd. Convenient for the third princess whom no one takes seriously. Yuna approached. They embraced. Briefly, reserved, but warmly. Yuna led her to Ethan. He was standing by the greenhouse, up to his elbows in the dirt, with a pot of wormwood in his hands. Seriana looked at him. He looked at her. She saw a farmer, dirty, thin, young, with calluses on his hands and dark circles under his eyes. He saw a girl who had been riding alone for 3 days on a road where bandits were not the worst danger, whose hands didn't tremble, whose eyes were calm, too calm for an 18-year-old. Ethan set down the pot, wiped his hands on his pants, asked if she had eaten today. Seriana blinked. She had expected a bow, or titles, or obsequiousness, or fear. She hadn't expected that question. No, she hadn't eaten. Since morning. 3 days of rushing. The crackers ran out yesterday. Ethan nodded. He turned toward the house. Berthold. Porridge. Berthold grumbled, but 10 minutes later there was a bowl of hot porridge with butter and a mug of herbal tea on the table. Chamomile and lavender. Ethan had brewed it himself. Not because he knew who she was. Because she had dark circles under her eyes and her fingers were trembling. Lack of sleep. Anxiety. Chamomile and lavender. A standard sedative. Seriana ate in silence, slowly, like someone who hadn't eaten hot food in a long time. When she finished, she looked up at Ethan. He was sitting across from her, waiting. She said she hadn't come as Yuna's friend. She had come as a representative of interests more complex than they appeared. Ethan said he was listening. Seriana spoke for an hour, calmly, without emotion, like a report. The situation in the empire is worse than they know in the villages. The Crimson Plague has struck 2 districts of the capital. The church is burning bodies at the western gates. There aren't enough healers. The alchemists' guild's elixirs don't work, and everyone knows it. But they keep quiet because Velior Stormhold is holding half the court in his grip. The king is ill. Not with the plague, with his heart. A bad heart. He is 52 and may not live to see the end of the year. 3 heirs. The first prince is a warrior without a brain. The second prince is a politician without a conscience. The third princess is a diplomat without an army. If the king dies, a struggle for the throne will begin. And in this struggle, the plague will become a tool. Whoever controls the cure controls the empire. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked what she wanted from him. Seriana said she needed an ally. Not a servant, not a vassal, an ally. A man who is not dependent on the court, who can heal, who does not want power. Because she knows those who want power. There's nothing to talk about with them. Ethan was silent. He thought. Then he asked what she was offering. Seriana said she could secure protectorate status for Greenhollow. Formally, the village would be under the crown's protection. In practice, it would be autonomous. Its own rules, its own laws, its own people. Neither the guild nor the church would be able to enter without permission. In return, Ethan would supply medicines to the crown. Not for free, but at a fair price. And he would train healers, not just Yuna. 10, 20, as many as needed. Ethan looked at her. She wasn't lying. He could see that. But she wasn't telling him everything either. She was playing her own game. She had her own goals. The third princess, without an army, was looking for trump cards against her brothers. And he was such a trump card. He understood that. She knew he understood. And she offered it anyway. Because a trump card that knows it's a trump card is a partner, not a pawn. Ethan said he needed to think it over. Seriana nodded. She said she would stay until tomorrow, if that was okay. Ethan said it was okay. Berthold set aside a room for her, a small one, clean, with a window overlooking the garden. Seriana stood by the window and looked out at the garden beds. Neat rows of wormwood, chamomile, silver moss, a small greenhouse with a cloudy bull's bladder instead of glass, and a guy kneeling between the beds, touching the earth with his hands. She watched for a long time. Then she stepped away from the window and lay down. For the first time in a week, she fell asleep right away, without sleeping pills, without magic, chamomile and lavender. In the morning, Ethan gave her his answer. He agreed, on certain conditions. First, Green Hollow becomes an autonomous settlement, the Green Yard, its name, its rules. Second, he won't go to the capital. The capital comes to him. Whoever needs treatment comes here. Third, the recipes are open. He won't monopolize the medicines. Anyone can make them if they learn how. Fourth, children with trash-picking skills, F and E ranks. He wants them sent here, not to the lower districts. Here, he will teach them. Seriana listened. She accepted the first 3 points immediately. The fourth made her fall silent. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked why. Ethan said that there are no useless skills. There are people who don't know how to use them. He was one of them. He didn't want that to happen to others. Seriana was silent. Then she said quietly that she herself had been told her whole life that C rank was a disgrace for a princess, that diplomat wasn't a real class, that she was useless. Ethan looked at her, at the princess who had ridden alone for 3 days, who, at 18, was playing her own game against her 2 older brothers, who, in an hour, had laid out for him the full picture of the empire's political crisis. He said that a person who, in an hour, had explained more to him than he had learned in 2 months in this world could not be useless. Seriana looked at him. For a second, for a single second, her face flinched. The mask cracked. For a split second, he saw not a princess, but a tired girl who had been told for the first time that she was needed. Then the mask returned. Seriana nodded. She stood up. She held out her hand. They shook hands. The farmer's dirty palm and the princess's delicate hand. A pact. She left that same day. On the road, she turned around. Ethan was standing at the gate. Beside him were Berthold, Una, Ashley, Lena, and Mir. 6 of them, in a ramshackle village, with a greenhouse and vegetable patches, against the empire, against the guilds, against the church, against the plague. Seriana turned her horse around and galloped toward the capital. She was smiling, for the first time in a long time. Chapter Summary. Princess Seriana arrived incognito and revealed to Ethan the full picture of the crisis in the empire. The king has a heart condition. 3 heirs are preparing to fight for the throne. The plague cure is a political trump card. Ethan agreed to an alliance on his own terms. Green Hollow will become the autonomous settlement of Green Court. Ethan will teach children with trash skills. Seriana left to formalize the protectorate. Week 10. Green Court existed only on paper so far. Seriana sent a pigeon with a short message. The decree has been signed. The protectorate has been established. Green Hollow receives the status of an autonomous settlement under the protection of the crown. Neither the guild nor the church has the right to enter without the headman's permission. Berthold was listed as the headman by default. He found out about it when Ethan read the letter aloud to him. Berthold sat down. Then he stood up. Then he sat down again. He said he was too old for this nonsense. Then he straightened up and went to repair the fence at the gate. For the first time in 10 years. The decree changed everything. Before, Green Hollow had been a hole on the edge of the map. Now it was a hole on the edge of the map with the royal seal. And that was a whole different matter. Ethan knew that the decree was a shield. A thin one. Paper thin. But a shield. Velior Stormhold couldn't just send assassins. Now it would be an attack on a crown protectorate. It would be war with the crown. Even Velior wasn't that insane. Not yet. Ethan used the respite, every day, every hour. He expanded the greenhouse, a second section, a cold one, for moon clover and silver moss, which need coolness. Gregor forged iron brackets. Tobias found old window frames in an abandoned house, with glass, real glass, cloudy, warped, but glass. Ethan set them into the south wall. The light became even, warm. The plants responded instantly. In just 1 week, growth accelerated by 1/3 without any extra expenditure of his energy. Just good light, just the right conditions. That was his philosophy, not to overexert himself with magic, to create conditions under which the plant itself performs at its best. and then give them a little nudge. Lena brought seeds from Hedgemere, 12 new species. Among them was one that made Ethan freeze. Short-statured, round leaves, pink flowers. Lena called it Maiden's Tears. It grows in cemeteries. No one picks it. Bad omen. Ethan touched a leaf. Analysis. And his breath caught in his throat. A penicillin analog. Not exact. Not identical. But the mechanism is the same. A substance that inhibits bacterial growth in a world without antibiotics. Where people die of blood poisoning after a cut. Where women in labor die of childbed fever. Where any wound can be fatal. He held the maiden's tear leaf and his hands trembled. Just like back then with the first wormwood, only more so. Because wormwood is a cure for one disease. An antibiotic is a cure for 1,000. He planted 20 bushes, a separate bed, a separate regimen. He began a slow modification. He took his time. An antibiotic isn't a fever reducer. You can't guess here. You need precision. You need tests. Una will help. Her diagnostic magic sees bacteria. She doesn't know they're bacteria, but she sees tiny living dots that shouldn't be where they are. Ethan explained the concept to her. Microorganisms, invisible living creatures that cause disease. Una listened, silently. Then she said that this explains why spells and prayers only work sometimes. They treat the symptom, not the cause. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Una said that if that's true, then all of this world's medicine is built on a mistake. Ethan said it wasn't a mistake. It was ignorance. A mistake is when you know and do it wrong. Ignorance is when you haven't learned yet. There's a difference. Una was silent. Then she said quietly that he phrased things very carefully, as if he were afraid of offending the whole world. Ethan said he wasn't afraid of offending. He was afraid of breaking. If you tell people that their gods don't heal, they'll stop believing. And if they stop believing before a replacement appears, they'll die of despair before they die of their illness. Una looked at him, for a long time. Then she said that he was the first man who had ever used the word carefully in her presence, and meant strategy rather than politeness. Ethan didn't know if it was a compliment or an observation. Una didn't explain. The 11th week. The first children arrived. Sariana kept her word. 5 of them. 3 boys, 2 girls. Ages 15 to 17. Classes: farmer, water carrier, cleaner, reader, seamstress. Ranks from F to E. Trash. Waste from the altar ritual. A sergeant of the Royal Guard brought them with a sealed letter from Sariana. The letter stated that these children were being sent as apprentices to Master Ethan Park of the Green Yard Settlement. Master. Ethan read the word and smirked. A master of F rank. The children stood in a line in the square, frightened, skinny, orphanage clothes, familiar bruises. He recognized those bruises. He knew how they appeared. He knew what a person looked like who had been beaten for being born different. Ethan walked up to them. He looked at each one. Then he said that no one beats anyone here. That there's porridge, hot water, and a roof here. That everyone here will have a job. Not a hard one, but an important one. And that their skills aren't trash. It's just that no one has figured out yet why they're needed. The water-carrying boy looked at him suspiciously. He asked what Ethan's rank was. Ethan said, Fur, F rank, grass cultivation. The boy blinked. He asked again. Ethan repeated it. The boy looked at the greenhouse, at the garden beds, at the strip of protective plants around the village, at Una in her white robe who had just come out of the house, at Ashley with 2 swords who was sharpening a blade by the fence, at Lena with a tray of mugs, at Meyer who was peeking out from the corner of the barn. The boy looked at Ethan again, and for the first time in a long while, something other than fear appeared on his face. Ethan began to teach. Not chemistry, not formulas. He taught him to see. The water diviner's name was Kai. His skill allowed him to sense water underground. Useless. Who needs a man who knows where the water is if you can dig a well? And Ethan sat him down next to the garden bed and asked him to show where the water was closest to the surface. Kai pointed. Here. Ethan transplanted moon clover there, a plant that grew only near running water. 3 days later, the clover began to grow so rapidly that Lena gasped. Kai stood nearby, unable to believe it. His useless ability had just accelerated the growth of a rare medicinal plant. The seamstress girl's name was Nora. Her ability allowed her to sense the texture of fibers by touch. Useless. Who needs a girl who knows which thread is softer? Ethan gave her some dried wormwood leaves. He asked her to grind them up. Nora ground them up and froze. She said that these leaves were different. These ones were stiff and dry, but these ones were softer, and they smelled stronger. Ethan checked. The softer ones contained 20% more artemisinin. Nora could determine the quality of the raw material by touch, without analysis, without magic, with her fingers. Ethan looked at her, and at Kay, and at the other three, and thought he was right. There are no useless skills. There is only a world that doesn't know how to use them. The reader's name was Alan, a quiet boy with big eyes. His skill allowed him to memorize a text after reading it just once, word for word, forever. Useless in a world where only 5% are literate and books cost a fortune. Ethan sat him down in front of the board and dictated the treatment protocol. All 4 stages, dosages, contraindications, side effects. Alan read it once, closed his eyes, repeated it without a single mistake. Ethan said that he was now a living book of prescriptions, that every new protocol would be recorded in him, that he would travel through the villages and teach herbalists, not on paper, orally. Because in this world, paper burns, but memory remains. Alan looked at him, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Not from grief, from the fact that for the first time in his life, he had been called necessary. By the end of the 11th week, 23 people were living in the green courtyard. Berthold and his cooking, Gregor and his hammer, Mark and Tobias, Lena, Una, Ashley, Meyer, 5 students, and Ethan, plus 6 people who had recovered from nearby villages and decided to stay. They worked in the fields, they helped in the greenhouse, they repaired 2 houses, they started building a 3rd. Ethan stood on the porch and looked out at the village. It was changing. The fences stood straight, the houses were painted, smoke from the chimneys, children's laughter, the sound of a hammer, and the smell of herbs, warm, bitter, alive. This was no longer Green Hollow. It was Green Court. His Green Court. But the shadows were thickening. Ethan sensed it not by skill, by instinct. Velier Stormhold had been silent for too long. The church had been silent for too long. Westmar on the border was stirring. All of this was the calm before the storm. And the storm came at the end of the 11th week. A pigeon from Seriana. 1 word. They're coming. They arrived 2 days after the pigeon. Not killers. Worse. Temple Inquisitors. 24 men. A full squad. The commander in front. A burly man with a square jaw and a scar running from his temple to his chin. Heavy armor. White cloaks with a golden sun. The symbol of the Church of the Bright Mother. Behind them, 12 soldiers in chainmail. And 10 monks in gray robes. The monks were carrying chains. Ethan was the first to notice them. Chains. Not for a door, for a person. They stopped at the gate of the green courtyard. The commander dismounted. He took out a scroll, the church's seal, the alchemist's guild's seal. 2 seals side by side. Ethan understood. Velior wasn't going to attack on his own. He'd made a deal with the church. The enemy of my enemy. The church wants Ethan for heresy. Velior wants to eliminate a rival. Together, they assembled a squad that has the right to enter any settlement, because the church's investigators stand above any protectorate, above any decree, even a royal one. Seriana couldn't have foreseen this, or perhaps she could, but didn't have time. The commander unrolled the scroll and began to read. The charges, heresy, use of forbidden healing methods, desecration of a divine gift, harboring a half-demon. The last one made Ethan go cold. They knew about Meyer. Someone had told them. Someone he'd treated. Or one of the merchants in Copper Log. It didn't matter. They knew. The commander finished reading. He said that Ethan Park must surrender voluntarily, along with the half-demon. His property is subject to confiscation. The greenhouse is to be destroyed. The herbs are to be burned. Ethan stood on the porch. Behind him stood Berthold, Una, Ashley, Lena. 5 students. Gregor with a hammer, Mark and Tobias. Mir was nowhere to be seen. She was hiding in the attic. Just like back then, on the first day. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, his fists clenched. 24 armed men against a handful of peasants. 1 B-rank swordsman, 1 A-rank healer who can't fight, and 1 F-rank farmer. The math was bad. Ashley stood beside him, 2 swords in her hands, ready. But she was doing the math too. 24. At least 5 C ranks among them. The commander was probably a B. She looked at Ethan. There was a question in her eyes. Ethan shook his head. No, not a fight. He stepped out onto the porch, alone, unarmed. He walked down the steps, across the yard, past the garden beds, past the greenhouse, to the gate, to the commander. 24 pairs of eyes were watching him. He stopped 3 steps away from the commander, looked at him, at his face, at the scar, at his neck, and saw it. A tiny spot, pink, by his Adam's apple. Stage 1. Barely noticeable. The commander doesn't know yet. Or he knows but doesn't want to know. Ethan looked at the soldiers. 1. The 2nd. The 3rd. The 4th has spots on his wrists, hiding them under gloves. The 7th has a cough. Dry, short, characteristic. The 9th has yellow whites of the eyes. Liver. The plague is already in it. Ethan counted. Out of 24, at least 12 were infected. Different stages. 1st, 2nd, 2/3. They had been traveling for 3 days from the capital. 2 neighborhoods in the capital were cordoned off. They had driven through the infected areas. They had carried the plague with them. They might not even have known it. Ethan looked the commander in the eye and spoke. Quietly, calmly, like a doctor. He said that Master Velior Stormhold had sent them here to die, that Velior himself had the plague, for a year now, that he was prolonging his life with elixirs that don't cure but only slow it down. The commander frowned. He said it was a lie. Ethan continued. He said the commander was in the 3rd stage, a spot on his neck, under his collar. He could check for himself, right now. The commander didn't move, but his hand twitched. It reached involuntarily toward his neck, stopped halfway. Ethan continued. He listed them off. The 4th soldier, spots on his wrists. The 7th, a cough. The 9th, jaundice. He named the symptoms. He named the stages, one after another. The silence grew heavier with every word. The soldiers exchanged glances. One took off his glove, looked at his hand, turned pale. Another touched his neck. A 3rd coughed and covered his mouth with his hand. The commander stood motionless. His face was frozen. He listened. Ethan finished his list. 12 out of 24, half the squad. Then he said the most important part. They could arrest him right now, take him to the capital, burn the greenhouse, kill the half-demon. All according to the law, to the letter and the seal. And in 2 weeks, 12 of them will be dead. Because in the capital, there's no one to cure them. The church healers can't handle it. Velior's elixirs don't work. The only cure grows right here, in these beds, in this greenhouse, which they've been ordered to burn. Or they can lower their swords, sit down, and drink some tea. Silence. The wind. The scent of wormwood from the garden beds. Somewhere behind Ethan, a door creaked. Lena stepped out of the greenhouse, a tray in her hands. 24 clay mugs. She had prepared them while he was speaking. She knew what he would say. She knew him. The commander stood there, a second, 2, 5, 10. He looked at Ethan, at his dirty hands, at his calm face, at his eyes, which held neither fear nor anger. Only the weariness of a doctor who had seen too often how people chose death out of pride. The commander slowly raised his hand to his neck. He unbuttoned his collar. He looked down. A spot, crimson, the size of a coin. He stood like that for a few seconds. Then he dropped to one knee. Behind him, a 2nd soldier, a 3rd, a 4th, one after another, 24 men, on their knees, in the mud, before the F-rank farmer. Lena walked among them, handed out mugs, to each one, silently, with a warm smile. They drank, silently, greedily, a bitter brew, bitter as the truth. Ethan stood in the middle of his yard and watched them, the enemies drinking his medicine, the soldiers who had come to kill him and now stood on their knees with clay mugs, Lena with an empty tray, Una in the doorway, crying for the first time since that boy in the capital's hospital, Ashley, who never sheathed her swords but had lowered them, at Bertold, who stood by the fence and said nothing, at the attic window where Meyer's huge eyes were hiding behind the shutters. Ethan said quietly, to no one, to himself, "A weed weaver then. All right, we'll remember that." Snow was falling, the first snow of this winter, soft, quiet. It settled on the soldiers' shoulders, on the greenhouse roof, on the wormwood beds, on the clay mugs. The commander finished his drink. He raised his head. He looked at Ethan. He asked his name. Ethan said it. The commander nodded. He said his name was Derek. Then he stood up. He wiped his mouth. He turned to the squad. He spoke briefly. "Camp by the road. Sheath your swords. Whoever touches the greenhouse, he'll personally tear their arms off." The squad got up. Silently. In an orderly fashion. They walked out the gate, set up camp. Ethan stood on the porch and watched as they pitched their tents. 24 enemies, who in an hour would become 24 patients, and in a week, perhaps 24 allies. Lena approached, stood beside him. She said quietly that she had exactly 24 mugs. She'd been counting heads while Ethan was talking. Ethan looked at her freckles, at her hands in the dirt, at her eyes which held no fear, only warmth. He said thank you. Lena said the pie would be ready by evening. Ethan nodded. Then he thought for a moment. Then he said that pie was good, and that he appreciated more than just the pie. Lena froze. She looked at him. Then she smiled, quietly, just the corners of her lips, just like he had smiled back then at the altar, and she went into the house. Bertold stood by the fence. He didn't sigh, for the first time ever. He just nodded. Winter settled over the green yard like a blanket, heavy, cold, but it was warm underneath. The greenhouses were running. Bonfires and pits kept the temperature up. The glass panels caught every ray of the two suns. Ethan slept for 4 hours. The rest of the time he worked. Derek and his squad stayed. Not all of them. 12 out of 24. The rest returned to the capital with a report. Derek wrote it himself. Ethan didn't know what was in it, but he knew Derek wasn't an enemy. 12 soldiers, healed, fed, grateful. They set up camp by the road and became a garrison of their own accord. No one asked. No one ordered it. Derek said that as long as he was here, no guild would pass through. Ethan nodded. He accepted it. The green yard was now more than just a village. 3 greenhouses, a drying shed, a storage shed, a small lab in Martha's old house. Lab is a bit of a stretch. A table, shelves, pots, a cauldron, a mortar for grinding, rags for filtering. But Una hung a sign on the door, Lab, and wrote Park and Ashford underneath. Ethan saw the sign and stopped. He stood in front of the door and looked at it. Park and Ashford. That was exactly what he wanted to write. Someday, when he had the time, when there was a reason. Una did it for him, because she knew, because she saw what he didn't say. Lena saw the sign later, in the evening. When she came in with an armful of dried herbs, she stopped at the door. She read it. She stood there for a long time. Then she traced the letters with her fingers. Then she went into the lab and silently began arranging the herbs on the shelves. She didn't say a word, but she smiled all evening. Winter was coming. The sick were arriving. Not in crowds, in pairs, in threes. From distant villages, sometimes from small towns. The plague was retreating from the outskirts of the Green Court, but further north it was spreading. Rumor had it the capital had already lost 3 districts. The church burned bodies day and night. Smoke hung over the city. The king was growing weak. Seriana sent pigeons. Briefly, dry, facts. The first prince is gathering an army. The second prince is scheming at court. Velior Stormhold continues to sell useless elixirs at triple the price. The war with Westmar has been postponed. Westmar is waiting, watching, like a vulture over a wounded animal. Ethan read these letters and realized that time was working against him. He needed more medicine, more people, more apprentices, more greenhouses. He needed a network. Not one village, but 10, 20. An herbalist in each, a stock of wormwood and chamomile in each, and 14 samples, in each, instructions. He started with Alan, a boy with a perfect memory. Ethan dictated everything to him, all the protocols, all the recipes, all the dosages, all the contraindications, every plant, every sample. Alan memorized it all on the first try. Then Ethan sent him to Copperlog, with mark for protection, with a sack of medicine to sell, and with a mission, to find an herbalist in town, or a pharmacist, or just a literate person willing to learn, and to teach him everything, for free. Alan returned 5 days later. An old man came with him, a pharmacist from Mednilog, a skeptic, a grumpy old man. He came to expose the charlatan. Ethan went out to meet him. He greeted him, offered him tea. The old man refused, demanded proof. Ethan led him to the patient, a man from a distant village, stage 3. He was lying in the guest house. Una scanned him in front of the apothecary, showed the diagnosis. Pathogen in the blood, in the lungs, in the liver. A classic case. Ethan brewed a decoction, gave it to the patient. 6 hours later, Una scanned him again. The pathogen in the blood had decreased threefold. The pharmacist stood in silence. Then he sat down on a chair. Then he asked for tea. 3 days later, he left with a full set of dried herbs and a handwritten protocol. And with the expression of a man who, at 60, had been shown that everything he'd been taught was wrong. But he didn't break. He adapted. Because a good doctor will always choose what works, not what he believes in. Ethan sent Alan out again, and again. Medni Log, Verkni Veselki, Dalny Ruchi. In every place he found a person. He taught them. He left a supply. He left. The network grew. By midwinter, there were people in 5 settlements who knew to prepare a plague decoction. Not perfectly, not like Ethan. But enough. Stages 1 and 2. Stages 3 and 4 were sent to Greenyard. Ethan kept track. Over 3 months, 213 patients, 4 fatalities, all 4 in stage 4, brought in too late. He remembered each of the 4. Name, face, last breath. He didn't cry, but after each one, he'd go to the greenhouse and sit there until dawn, alone, in the dark, among his plants. Lena would come, sit down next to him, stay silent. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't say he'd done everything he could. She just sat there, and that silence was worth more than any words. A winter evening, snow outside the window, the greenhouse, a lamp, everyone together. Lena is cleaning roots. Una is writing a report. Ashley is sharpening swords. Meyer sleeps in the corner, curled up in a ball. Horns stick out from under the blanket. Kai waters the beds. Nora sorts dried leaves by touch. Alan quietly recites recipes. Bertold brought a teapot and grumbles that there's no proper table in the greenhouse. Ethan is sitting on the floor. In front of him is a pot of maiden's tears, a penicillin analog. He's been working on it for 2 months. Carefully, slowly, increasing the concentration, testing it on infected wounds. Una scanned before and after. There were results. Slow, unstable, but there were results. He felt he was close. Another week, maybe 2, and he would have the first antibiotic, the first in the history of this world. He placed his palm on the pot, closed his eyes, and smiled. Then someone came, a messenger from Sariana. Not a pigeon, a man, on horseback, through the blizzard, a 3-day journey. The messenger was pale, frozen. Ashley let him in. Una gave him something hot. He warmed up. He took out a letter. Ethan opened it, read it, reread it, looked at Una. Sariana wrote that the king was dying. His heart. A week, maybe 2. The healers are powerless. And that she'd heard from Una that Ethan had something for the heart. Foxglove. A pot in the corner of the greenhouse, with a label. Dangerous. Do not touch. Ethan stood in front of that pot and thought, if the king dies, a war for the throne will begin. If a war for the throne begins, the plague will spread uncontrollably. If the plague spreads, Thousands will die. Tens of thousands. He could stop it with a single pot, with the right dosage. Digoxin, a cardiac glycoside, saves lives in cases of arrhythmia, strengthens contractions, stabilizes the rhythm. But, the dosage. He had never tested foxglove on the people of this world. He doesn't know their physiology at that level. He doesn't know how digoxin interacts with the magic that flows in the blood of every inhabitant of Airtanis. A mistake in the dosage means death. Not just death, the murder of the king, regicide, the end of the Green Court, the end of everything. He stood before the pot. Lena approached. Una approached. Ashley approached. Even Myra approached. They stood around him, silently, waiting. Ethan closed his eyes, opened them, took the pot off the shelf, told Una he needed her diagnosis, complete, detailed, everything she could see in a human body, heart rate, rhythm, blood volume, everything. Una nodded. Ethan turned to Lena, said he needed her hands to prepare the extract. Precise, drop by drop. Lena nodded. Ethan turned to Ashley, said she needed to deliver the medicine to the capital, quickly, in 2 days, through the blizzard. Ashley bared her teeth, not out of anger, out of excitement. She said she'd do it in a day. Ethan worked all night. Foxglove leaves, cold extraction, filtration, refiltration, concentration. He couldn't measure it precisely. He couldn't. He didn't have the instruments, but he could feel it. His hands could feel the concentration of glycosides in the liquid, just as a phytochemist can taste the difference between 10 and 20 milligrams per liter. He brought it down to the minimum therapeutic dose, the lowest, the safest. Better a weak effect than a dead king. In the morning, 3 vials stood on the table. Small, dark glass, sealed with wax. A label on each. Dosage, method of administration, contraindications, frequency. He wrote a long instruction for Seriana, detailed, with warnings, with a description of overdose symptoms, stating that if in any doubt, she should stop and wait. Ashley took the vials, the letter, tucked them into her saddlebag, looked at Ethan, said she'd be back in 3 days, and that if he dared to die while she was on the road, she would find him in the afterlife and kill him all over again. Ethan said he'd try. Ashley rode off into the blizzard. Ethan stood at the gate and watched her go. The snow covered her tracks. Berthold stood nearby, silently. Then he said that Ethan had just sent a medicine that could save the king, or kill him. Ethan said he knew. Berthold said it was hard. Ethan said he knew. Berthold was silent. Then he said the porridge was on the table. Ethan went inside, sat down. Porridge, hot, with butter. He ate and calculated the glycoside concentration in his head, over and over, checking himself, double-checking. A spoonful, a sip, a calculation. A spoonful, a sip. Ashley returned 4 days later, not 3. The blizzard had delayed her. She stumbled into the house, wet, frozen, scratched, with a cut on her cheek. Ashley returned 4 days later, not 3. The blizzard had delayed her. She stumbled into the house, wet, frozen, scraped up, with a cut on her cheekbone. Una rushed to her. Ashley waved her off, said the cheekbone was nothing. Bandits at the pass, 3 of them. There were 3. Una asked, pale, what were meant. Ashley shrugged. Then she pulled a letter from her bosom, dry, warm from her body. Seriana's seal. Ethan took it, opened it, read it, and exhaled. For the first time in 4 days, he exhaled normally. The king is alive. The medicine worked. Seriana wrote briefly. First vial, 12 hours after ingestion. His heart rate evened out. His breathing stabilized. His complexion improved. The second vial in 24 hours. The king stood up, sat down in a chair. For the first time in 3 weeks. He spoke, clearly. He asked for food. Seriana held back the 3rd vial, following Ethan's instructions. Better a weak effect than an overdose. The king asked who was treating him. Seriana didn't answer. Not yet. Ethan reread the letter 3 times. Then he sat down in a chair. Then he leaned forward and buried his forehead in the table, not from exhaustion, from relief, which was so intense it made him sick. He hadn't slept properly in 4 days. 4 days of calculating the concentration in his head. 4 days of waiting for a pigeon with a single word. Dead. The pigeon didn't arrive. Ashley arrived, with a gash on her cheekbone and a letter near her heart. Yuna healed Ashley. True healing. White light. Warm. The wound on her cheekbone closed in a minute. Ashley winced, said it tickled. Yuna said that next time she'd better dodge. Ashley said she dodged the first 2, but the third one had a crossbow. Yuna turned pale. Ashley smirked. Then she looked at Ethan, who was sitting with his forehead pressed against the table. She walked over, placed her hand on his shoulder. Heavy, warm. She didn't say anything, just her hand, and that was enough. Evening. The greenhouse. Everyone together. Ethan spoke. The king is alive. The medicine is working. Digitalis is working. Digoxin is working. Silence. Then Berthold said that this meant the king now wanted Ethan personally. Ethan nodded. Berthold said that was worse than assassins. Ethan nodded again. Because an assassin wants you dead, but the king wants you alive, and in his pocket, forever. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Winter. Snow. Work. Ethan finished the antibiotic. Maiden's tear. The concentration of the antibacterial agent had reached an effective level. Yuna tested it. An infected wound on the leg of one of Darek's soldiers. An old one. It had been festering for 2 months. The healers had treated the surface, but the infection remained inside. Ethan applied a compress with an extract of the tear. After a day, the pus was gone. 3 days later, the wound began to close with clean tissue. The soldier walked without limping for the first time in 6 months. Yuna stood over his leg and said nothing. Then she turned to Ethan and said that he had just accomplished the impossible. Ethan said it wasn't impossible. It was a common antibiotic. It had been discovered by accident on Earth, in a petri dish. Yuna didn't understand a word, but she understood the main point. Something small, invisible, killing what their magic cannot. Ethan said that this was only the beginning. If he was right about microorganisms, then half the diseases in this world could be treated not with spells, but with hygiene. Washing hands, boiling water, sterilizing instruments. Yuna listened. Then she said quietly that if this became known, the church wouldn't just send in investigators. The church would declare war on him. Because if diseases are caused not by demons, but by tiny creatures, then what is the church for? Ethan said nothing. Because she was right. Knowledge is dangerous. Not in and of itself, but to those who fear it. The end of winter. The snow was melting. The roads were slushy. And along the slushy road, a person Ethan wasn't expecting arrived at Green Court. A woman, about 28 years old, glasses, hair pulled back in a bun, a raincoat splattered with mud, a notebook in her hands, always a notebook in her hands. Dr. Hay Lee Carter, an alchemist researcher from Calderion University. Class, analyst. Rank, B. She arrived alone. No security, no entourage. On a university mare who clearly would have preferred a stall. Haley dismounted. She looked at the village, at the greenhouses, at the garden beds, at the park and Ashford sign, at Ethan, who came out to meet her. She said she was here to study the so-called park phenomenon, that the university had tasked her with documenting it, that she expected to find either a talented charlatan or an inexplicable anomaly, and that in any case she would write an honest report. Ethan looked at her. Glasses, notepad, academic tone, a ponytail. She reminded him of the people at Cornell, colleagues, the ones he'd argued with until midnight about isomers and biosynthetic pathways. He smiled. He asked how they were doing here with the acid-base balance theory. Haley blinked. Then she slowly took off her glasses, wiped them, put them back on, looked at him. Said she didn't know what acid-base balance was, but she really wanted to find out. They talked until dawn. Ethan spoke. Haley took notes. Notebook after notebook. She asked, he answered. She didn't believe him. He proved it. She checked. Una scanned. The data matched. By morning, Haley had filled 4 notebooks. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the scale of it all. She looked up from her notes. She looked at Ethan. She said quietly that if even a tenth of what he'd told her was true, then all the alchemy in this world was child's play. Ethan said it wasn't child's play, just early. Like alchemy on Earth before Lavoisier. Lots of observations, little system. Haley asked who Lavoisier was. Ethan said he'd tell her. Later, when she'd had some sleep. Haley said she didn't want to sleep. She wanted to know. Ethan said the knowledge wasn't going anywhere, but at this rate, she'd be gone in a week. Haley looked at him. She said that all the men at the university told her she thought too much, that it didn't suit a woman, that she needed a husband, not a notebook. Ethan said a notebook was more useful than most husbands. Haley laughed, for the first time in a long time. She stayed, of course. Ethan offered her a co-authorship, the world's first monograph on phytochemistry, a systematic description of the medicinal plants of Airtanus. Properties, applications, dosages, mechanisms of action. Haley asked whose name would be first on the cover. Ethan said hers. Haley froze. She asked again. Ethan repeated it, her name, first, because she would be writing, he would be dictating, and whoever writes is the author. Haley took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, put them back on, said something had gotten in her eye. Behind the wall, Una quietly told Ashley that happiness had gotten in her eye. Ashley said she understood. Spring came early. The snow had melted in a week. The earth was breathing, damp, warm, ready. Ethan stood on the hill behind the village and looked down. The green yard, his green yard. 3 greenhouses, a laboratory, a drying room, a warehouse, a guest house for patients. Derek's barracks. 28 residential buildings, half of them new, built over the winter. A population of 47 people. There used to be 12, now there were 47. Smoke from the chimneys, the sound of a hammer, children's laughter. Students were running through the garden beds. Kai was checking the water level. Nora was sorting dried leaves. Alan was dictating a recipe to a new student. Bertold was yelling at everyone at once and cooking 20 servings of porridge. Lena was preparing a batch of antibiotics in the lab. Una was scanning a patient in the guest house. Haley was sitting at a table writing the 4th chapter of a monograph at the table. Mira was in the greenhouse, watering the night-blooming flowers that Ethan had grown for her. They were still blooming, every night. Ashley was sharpening a sword at the gate and telling Derek an indecent joke. Derek was blushing. Ethan watched this and felt something he couldn't name. Not joy, not pride. Something quieter, deeper, like the roots of a plant that had found water and were no longer searching. He walked down the hill, crossed the courtyard, entered the lab. He sat down at the table. Before him lay his notes. 3 months of work, 213 patients, 4 deaths, 31 species of medicinal plants, 7 modifications of wormwood, an antibiotic, a fever reducer, a cardiac glycoside, an anticoagulant from moon clover, a sedative from chamomile and lavender, a wound healing agent made from silver moss, an irritating powder for defense, a protective strip made from stone tears, a network of 7 outposts in the surrounding area, each with a trained herbalist, each with a supply of medicine. He had started with a pot and a shack 3 months ago, one guy with an F rank and a dead sprig of mint, and now, he rubbed his eyes. A dove, another one. Sariana's letter. He opened it, read it, and froze. Sariana wrote that Velior Stormhold was dead. The plague. Stage 4. He refused treatment. They found him in his study. On the table stood a cup with a long, cold, useless elixir. An empty vial nearby. Poison. He chose poison. Not the plague. Not Ethan's medicine. Poison. The Alchemist Guild was left without a leader. The three senior masters are dividing the inheritance. They have no time for a farmer from the village. For now. Ethan sat with the letter in his hands and reminisced. An old man with an impeccable reputation. The face of a philanthropist. A basement full of useless potions. Assassins. Inquisitors. Compromising evidence. And in the end, an empty office. Cold tea. A vial of poison. Ethan would have offered him a bunch of wormwood. Not as a victor. As a doctor. Velior didn't take it. And he wouldn't have taken it. Because accepting help from someone you tried to destroy is more painful than dying. Ethan placed the letter on the table. He went out into the greenhouse. He sat on the floor among his plants. The wormwood smelled bitter, familiar, like the first night, like the first bush, like the first mug for Berthold. 3 months. A lifetime. He sat there thinking about what would happen next. The plague hasn't been defeated. It has retreated from the Green Court and the surrounding areas. But in the capital, it's growing. In the south, the villages are emptying out. In the north, Westmar awaits. This isn't the end. It's the end of the beginning. He needs more greenhouses, more students, more medicines. He needs a real laboratory, with equipment, with instruments. He needs a school, not a workshop, but a school. Where children with trashy skills learn that there's no such thing as trashy skills. He needs a network of pharmacies throughout Calderion, so that a peasant could buy a fever remedy for a copper coin instead of paying gold to a charlatan. He needs to understand what the Crimson Plague really is, because his feelings were telling him something he couldn't yet explain. The plague didn't behave like a disease. It behaved like a program, like code, like something created, intentionally, long ago. He remembered the altar, the warm stone, the vibration, as if something were breathing inside. The system, the ancient system, which had given him a skill, which had disguised him as trash. Why? He knew the answer. He felt it. Just as he felt the concentration of alkaloids in a leaf, the system had been waiting, 1,000 years, waiting for a person who would understand what had been given to him. Not a warrior, not a mage, not a hero, a farmer, who knows that salvation has always been underfoot, in every leaf, in every stalk, in every weed by the road. Ethan stood up. He stepped out of the greenhouse. It was getting dark. 2 suns were setting. The red one first, the yellow one following. The sky was ablaze. People had gathered in the square in front of the house. His people. Berthold with his cauldron, Gregor with a hammer on his shoulder, Mark and Tobias with planks for the new house, Derek and his soldiers, Kai, Nora, Alan, Lena at the laboratory door, Park and Ashford, Una on the porch of the guest house, a white robe, without the silver clasp. She took it off a month ago. She doesn't wear it anymore. Ashley at the gate, 2 swords, a scar across her eyebrow, a smile that would make bandits run faster than from swords. Meyer on the roof of the barn, hood thrown back. Her horns are visible, for the first time. She no longer hid them, not here, not among her own. And somewhere far away in the capital of Sarian, she sat at a table over a map, planning her next move. The third princess, with a C rank and a mind of steel, who would one day become not a pawn, but a queen. And Haley at the table in the lab. She was writing. The 4th chapter, then the 5th, then the 20th. The first monograph on phytochemistry in this world. Carter and Park on the cover. Her name first. Just as he had promised, Ethan stood on the porch and watched them. All of them. And he felt the weight. Not physical, moral. The weight of knowing that with a single foxglove bush he could save the king or kill him. That with a single batch of wormwood he could stop an epidemic or start a war. That with a single decision he could change the world or break it. This weight grew with each passing day, and it would continue to grow. But there were people nearby who bore it alongside him. Not because he paid them, not because he gave them medicine, because he once asked, "Have you eaten today?" because he once brought porridge to the girl with the horns, because he hung a stranger's name on the door next to his own, because he grew mint just like his mother used to, because he put her name first. They came for the herbs, they stayed for him, and he still didn't believe it, couldn't believe it. A nerdy guy from Cornell, with 2 cats and a magazine subscription, whom the girls tolerated at best. He stood on the porch in a strange world, in a strange body, with dirty hands and dark circles under his eyes. And all around, people stood around him, who hadn't come for medicine, who had come for him. He didn't understand that yet, but one day he would, when one of them says it outright. When Lena says that a pie isn't just a pie. When Una says she doesn't understand how he lives without her. When Ashley kisses him in the doorway after yet another ambush. When Sariana comes not on business, but simply because she missed him. When Haley says that a notebook is more useful than most husbands, but he isn't the majority. When Meyer calls him Big Brother for the first time. But that will be later. And now he was standing on the porch. Spring, the smell of wet earth. Wormwood tastes bitter. 2 suns, a new world. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. He looked at the yard, at the greenhouse, at the garden beds, at the people. He said quietly, to no one, to himself, "Well then, farmer, F-rank, growing grass. Let's see what grows out of this." He smiled, with one corner of his mouth, just like back then, at the altar. And he walked toward the greenhouse, to work. A year had passed. The green courtyard had become a town. Not a big one, not a capital city, but a town. 312 people, a stone wall around the perimeter, not for beauty, to keep people out at night. 6 greenhouses, 2 laboratories, a school, a real school with desks and a blackboard, 23 students, all with trash-picking skills, all needed, all in their place. A pharmacy network spread across 11 towns, and each a trained herbalist, and each a stockpile, plague medicine, antibiotics, fever reducers, wound healers, sedatives, for a penny, for a single penny. A peasant could buy what he would have sold a cow for a year ago. The world was changing, slowly, painfully, with a creak. But it was changing. Ethan stood in the main greenhouse and looked at a plant that hadn't been there a month ago. Tall, waist-high, silvery leaves, blue veins. It glowed. Quietly, steadily, like a lamp underwater. He had found it in the basement. Not just any basement, the basement beneath the altar. 3 weeks ago, Alan had read an old book in the Copper Log Library, a crumbling one, in a language no one knew. Alan had memorized every symbol, brought it to Ethan. Haley had spent a week deciphering it. Not the entire text, just fragments. But the fragments were enough. Under every altar in every temple there is a basement. Sealed. Ancient. Left behind by the civilization that created the system. In the basement, seeds. Alive. Alive for 1,000 years. Waiting. Ethan went to the nearest temple. A village 2 days' journey away. The temple was abandoned. The altar was cracked. The priest had left 10 years ago. Ethan went down into the basement alone, with a lamp. The steps led deep down. The air was dry, dead, like in a tomb. At the bottom of the stairs was a room, small, stone walls covered with symbols. Haley would later say that it was the language of a former race. A script that no one had seen in 1,000 years. There were jars on a stone shelf. 12 of them. Clay. Sealed with wax. Ethan took the first one, scraped off the wax. Inside was earth. Dry. Dusty. And in it, a seed. Small. Silvery. Dead to the eye. Ethan touched it with his finger, and the world exploded. Not literally, in his head. A flood of data, as if someone had poured an entire library into his brain. An alkaloid profile. 1,000 compounds. No. 10,000. No, he couldn't count them. The plant contained everything. Absolutely everything. Every alkaloid, every glycoside, every terpene, every phenol. Every substance he had ever known on Earth, and thousands he didn't know. It wasn't a plant. It was a biological computer. A library in the form of a seed. The entire pharmacopoeia of the former race compressed into a single organism. And it had been waiting, 1,000 years. Waiting for a human with the skill of growing weed. The only skill that could activate it. Ethan held the seed in his palm, and his hands were shaking. He brought it home, planted it in the best soil, in the best greenhouse, placed his palms on the pot, and grew it. 3 days, without a break. Lena brought him water. Una monitored his pulse. Ashley stood at the door and let no one in. Meyer sat in the corner and watched silently. Haley recorded every change every hour. After 3 days, Ethan collapsed. He just shut down. He lay on the greenhouse floor for 12 hours. Una didn't leave his side for a minute. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the plant. You was growing. Silvery leaves, blue veins, a glow. And he could feel it, all of it. Every molecule, every biosynthetic pathway, every possibility. It was like gaining access to a supercomputer after a lifetime on a calculator. Haley named it the Archive. Ethan didn't argue. You couldn't have come up with a better name. Now he stood before the archive and thought. A month had passed since then. He had been studying the plant every day, slowly, carefully, layer by layer, and the deeper he delved, the clearer the picture became. The Crimson Plague was not a disease. He had suspected as much for a long time. Now he knew for sure. The archive contained data, not in the form of text, in the form of chemical signatures, like fingerprints. The former race had cataloged every disease, every pathogen, every poison, and the Crimson Plague was among them, but not in the diseases section, in the weapons section, biological weapons, created by the former race, against itself. A civil war, 1,000,000 years ago. One faction created the plague to destroy the other. The other faction created the system to find a cure. The skill herb cultivation is not junk. It is a key, the only tool capable of activating the archive and synthesizing an antidote. But a key without knowledge is useless. For 1,000 years, the system distributed this skill to random people, shepherds, orphans, beggars. None of them understood what they held in their hands. None of them could read the library that lay at their feet, until a man from another world arrived, an agronomist, a phytochemist, who knew what an alkaloid was, who could read the data not because he'd been taught in this world, but because he'd been taught in that one. The system didn't take him by chance. Hitting his temple against the curb was a challenge, a trap network across worlds. 1,000 years of scanning realities, 1,000 years of searching, for one person. Ethan thought about it, about the greenhouse at Cornell, about the wormwood seedlings he hadn't had time to transplant, about the cat meowing at the door, about the life that had been taken from him, without asking, without warning, without warning. He was angry, quietly, deeply, like a river beneath the ice. Then the anger subsided, because he looked at the greenyard, at the people, at the greenhouses, at the students, at Lena, who was standing at the lab door with an armful of fresh herbs, at Una, who was sitting on the porch and, for the first time in a year, didn't look tired, at Ashley, who was teaching Mir how to hold a knife, not a combat knife, a kitchen knife, for cutting roots, at Mir, who was laughing, out loud, without her hood, with her horns in plain sight, at Haley, who ran out of the lab with a notebook, shouting that she'd found a pattern in the archive's data, at Bertold, who was cursing that the porridge was burning and that everyone had abandoned him for some bush. Ethan hadn't chosen this world, but this world chose him, and now he couldn't leave. Not because he couldn't physically, because he didn't want to. Because there were people here who were waiting for him. In the evening, a pigeon arrived from Seriana. A long letter, the longest one yet. The king is alive. The medicine is working. He takes digitalis every day, at Ethan's dosage. He's been on his feet for 2 years now. The first prince has retreated. The second prince has fallen silent. Seriana has been given a new position, advisor on health affairs. A position that didn't exist before. She created it. For herself. Tailored to her. Westmar has retreated from the border, not out of fear, out of pragmatism. The plague has reached Westmar. The chancellor who wanted to go to war has fallen ill himself. Westmar sent envoys, not to the king, to Ethan, directly. They asked for the medicine. Ethan gave it to them, for free, because the plague knows no borders, and neither should the cure. Seriana wrote that the Church of the Bright Mother had split. Some of the priests accepted his methods, others declared them heresy, a quiet schism, without war, for now. Derek remained at the Green Court. His 12 soldiers became a permanent garrison, not by order, by choice. Derek said that in 30 years of service, this was the first place where he felt he was doing the right thing. Ethan read Seriana's letter and thought that 3 months ago he had been standing alone on the porch of a shack, with a pot of wormwood. And now he had a city, an army, a school, a network of pharmacies, a political alliance with the princess, a monograph, an archive, and the knowledge that the plague is a weapon, and that somewhere, deep within the world, sleeps the thing that created this weapon, and that it is waking up, slowly, but inevitably. Ethan rolled up the letter, placed it on the table, stood up, left the house. It was evening outside, warm, spring-like. 2 suns were setting, the red one first, as always. He walked through the courtyard, past the greenhouses, past the laboratory, past the school, past the barracks, to the small field beyond the wall, which used to be a wasteland, and now he stopped. Bushes grew before him, in rows, even, neat. 31 species, each labeled, each in its place. Wormwood that saved Berthold, chamomile that brought down the fever, silver moss that kept the body alive while the medicine worked. Sample 14, aspirin, which is now not a sample but a medicine with a name. Haley called it sunflower, moon clover that glowed at night, lady's tear, an antibiotic, dust bell, defense, stone tears, perimeter protection, mountain mint, which he grew for Ashley, because her mom used to brew it when she was a kid. Ashley stood in front of that bush one evening and cried, for the first time in 10 years. Ethan didn't see, Lena saw, and kept quiet, because some things don't need words. Foxglove, in a separate pot, with a sign, dangerous, do not touch. The sign remained, the fear remained too. And it must remain, because a medicine that cannot kill cannot save either. And the archive, in the center of the field, silvery, glowing, tall, beautiful, and terrifying, because within it lay the truth about what had killed an entire civilization, and about what was awakening again. Ethan walked between the rows, touching the leaves, every single one. Analysis, automatic, familiar, like breathing. Wormwood, artemisinin concentration stable, chamomile, bisabolol normal, clover, anticoagulant active, foxglove, digoxin, careful, don't touch it unnecessarily. Archive, 1,000 signals at once. He withdrew his hand. Too much. Not yet. He reached the end of the field. He stopped. In front of him was a small pot, separate from the rest. Lilies of the valley. Those very ones. The ones he'd grown for Seriana. A personal pot, not a government one. She'd taken it to the capital, but left one shoot behind. Asked him to keep it. He kept it. The lily of the valley was blooming. White bells. A delicate scent. Ethan sat down beside it. He looked at the lily of the valley, at the field, at the wall of the green courtyard, at the smoke from the chimneys, at the windows where lights were on, at the silhouettes of people. Lena came up behind him, silently, as always. She sat down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. She didn't say a word. A minute later, Una came. She stood behind him. She put her hand on his shoulder, slender fingers, warm. A minute later, Ashley came. She plopped down next to him, stretched out her legs. She said the porridge was getting cold and that Berthold would personally rip his head off if he didn't show up in 5 minutes. A minute later, Meyer ran up, without her hood. Her horns glinted in the sunset. She climbed onto Ethan's back, snuggled up, silently, like a kitten. Haley ran out of the lab with a notebook. She was jotting something down as she ran. She stumbled, dropped her glasses, picked them up, ran over, out of breath. She said she'd found 7 more unknown compounds in the archive's data, and that if Ethan didn't come take a look right now, she wouldn't be responsible for her own sanity. Ethan sat among them, 6 people, 6 women. Each had come for the weed. Each had stayed for him. And he still thought it was all about the weed. Lena looked at him. He caught her gaze, freckles, warm eyes. She didn't look away, for the first time. He felt something in his chest, unfamiliar, warm. He got scared. He looked away first. Lena sighed quietly. Una whispered a single word behind his back. Idiot. Ashley laughed. Myri giggled. Haley wrote something in her notebook and then quickly crossed it out. Ethan stood up. He brushed off his knees. He looked at the field, at the 31 view, at the archive, at the lily of the valley, at everything he'd grown over the past year. Then he looked at the people around him, and he thought that plants are simple. They're understandable, logical, predictable. Give them water and light, and they grow. People are more complicated. People are unpredictable. People bring pies that don't mean pie, and cry over mint, and unfasten silver clasps, and hide horns under hoods, and write monographs all night, and gallop through blizzards with medicine close to their hearts, and arrive incognito through 3 kingdoms. He didn't understand them, not completely, but he was learning, just as he had on the first day, page by page, sight by sight, person by person, slowly, carefully, with the same quiet scientific curiosity with which he had touched the first bush by the road. He walked toward the house. They followed him. Everyone. Berthold stood in the doorway with a ladle. He was cursing that the porridge had definitely burned and that Ethan was personally to blame. Ethan sat down at the table, Lena on the right, Una on the left, Ashley across from him, Mir next to Ashley. She climbed onto the bench with her feet. Haley at the end, a notebook on her lap. Even at dinner, Berthold served out the porridge, sat down himself, looked at the table, at their faces, shook his head. Said that a year and a half ago, an old man and 24 cockroaches lived in this house. And now, he didn't finish, waved his hand, picked up a spoon. They ate in silence, quietly. The porridge wasn't burnt. Berthold was lying. He always lied about the porridge. Because if he wasn't going to curse, he had to say something nice, and nice things came out worse from him. After dinner, Ethan went out onto the porch, alone. Night, stars, other stars, not Earth's, unfamiliar constellations. He never learned their names. Inside the house, behind him, people were laughing. Ashley was telling a story. Mir was giggling. Una said it was inappropriate. Haley was taking notes. Lena was washing the dishes. Berthold was snoring in his chair. Ethan stood on the porch. He looked up at the sky. He thought about Earth, about the greenhouse, about the wormwood sprouts that had withered without him, about the cat meowing at the door. And for the first time, he allowed himself to think that maybe it wasn't for nothing. That maybe hitting his head on the curb wasn't the end, but the beginning. That maybe the cat had found a new owner. That the seedlings would have died anyway from the first frost. That he was needed here more. That he was needed here. He stood on the porch. Farmer, F-rank, growing grass, weed weaver, who saved the king, who stopped the plague, who found the antibiotic, who neutralized the killers with a bush of flowers, who brought the temple guard to its knees with a clay mug, who grew mint for nightmares and lily of the valley for loneliness, and night-blooming flowers for the fear of being oneself. who found the archive of a dead civilization and now knew that the most terrible war was yet to come, who didn't grow grass, but grew it for a specific person, every single time, he said quietly into the darkness. A weed weaver, then. Got it. And he went inside, to his people. Because the porridge is getting cold, and Bertold will start swearing again, and Lena will smile, and Una will sigh, and Ashley will say something both rude and warm at the same time, and Meyer will put her feet up on the bench, and Haley will drop her glasses into her plate, and it will be the most ordinary evening in the green courtyard, nothing remarkable about it, except that every person at this table was alive because once upon a time, a guy with an F rank planted a seed in a pot. The door closed, light in the window, laughter, silence, stars above the green courtyard, 2 moons. Ethan didn't know about the 2 moons. He had never looked up at the sky long enough. He always looked at the ground, at the roots, at the leaves, at the soil. Maybe one day he'll look up, but not today. Today, he has porridge, and people, and 31 species of plants, and a whole world that needs to be healed. That's enough. That's enough for today.